Tonight on the Black Channel, our efforts to resolve getting our history restored have been bearing fruit slowly but surely. The Black Channel is live. Unapologetic, unadulterated, and absolutely uncompromising. Greetings, brothers and sisters from around the world, and welcome back to the home, the haven, the stronghold, and the everlasting superfortress of intelligent black thought. We are the Black Media, and this is the Black Channel, and I am the Black Authority. And you are listening live to the only historically black college and university or higher education and learning in the cosmos. Of course, you're going to join us. And join us you shall, because on tonight's program, a few things. There's actually a number of things I want to touch on. There's actually a number of things I want to discuss and go into here tonight. So have some patience. We got a lot to go over here tonight. A lot to go over. So I'm very glad you all are joining us for it. And first and foremost, what I want to do here is I want to go over this. I want to go over this. You know, when we say it, everyone ignores it. When we say it, everyone ignores it. Everybody ignores it when we say it. And it's not until some white folks say it that it finally becomes true. So when we say that the Egyptians were black, folk want to argue with it till some white folks say it, and then it becomes, of course they were black. When we talk about what our cultural achievements were in America, everyone disputes it until some white folks say it. Of course black folk did that. It's always that way. Our job is to make sure that we don't let other people bully us into silence. That's very, very important. And one of the reasons why is because this was from Democracy Now! And it is about a new biography of Dr. King coming out. And I want you to hear some of what they had to say here. And this starts us off, I think, on a good foot here tonight. I want you to hear some of what they had to say.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We spend the rest of the hour with the author of the first major biography of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in decades. Jonathan Eig's King, A Life was published this month and draws on unredacted FBI files, as well as the files of the personal aide to President Lyndon Johnson, that shows how he and others partnered with the FBI's surveillance of King and efforts to destroy him, led by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Eig wrote in a New York Times opinion essay about the book that the documents reveal how, quote, Johnson was more of an antagonist to King and a conspirator with Hoover than he has been portrayed by...
Well, they didn't tell you this in school, and Hollywood has certainly not done that for those of us who... But there's only so far you can get with that. You might have had the stream drop out here for a moment. When we start talking about real things, you know, hinky stuff is going to happen. So just hang on to your hats. Don't worry, we're here.
Opinion essay about the book that the documents reveal how, quote, Johnson was more of an antagonist to King and a conspirator with Hoover than he has been portrayed. By personalizing the FBI's assault on King, Americans cling to a view of history that isolates a few bad actors who opposed the civil rights movement, including Hoover, Governor George Wallace of Alabama, and the Birmingham lawman Bull Connor. They thus fail to acknowledge the institutionalized, well-organized resistance to change in our society. That's Jonathan Eig, author of King, A Life, for which he also interviewed more than 200 people, including many who knew King closely, like the singer, actor, and activist, the late, great Harry Belafonte. The book has also drawn attention for its revelation that King was less critical of Malcolm X than previously thought. Ig found the original transcript of an interview King did with Alex Haley, who's the author who collaborated with Malcolm X on his autobiography. The transcript shows how Haley misquoted and even made up part of King's response. In fact, King never said Malcolm has done himself or our people a great disservice, and King's comment about fiery, demagogic oratory was not related to Malcolm X. To talk about all of this...
Well, now, you got to understand, for the better part now of the last decade, we in the new black media, none of us actually walking the earth during the 1960s, we have always disputed that. We have never backed the idea that there was some intense conflict between Dr. King and Malcolm X. We were the ones who always said, if you take a look at the writings, the interviews, you take a look at what they said, they were actually a whole lot closer toward the end of their lives than the white media has ever given the idea, which is why we had to talk about this, because they were never going to say this. We've been indefatigable. Look it up. We have been unrelenting about this now for over a decade. We would not let it go. They've been trying to rewrite the history the whole time. For those of you who were born in the 80s or 90s, you have to understand, it was only a little over a decade. By the time you get to 1980, it was only a little over a decade before those men were killed. Just 10 years. So by this point, that was why it was so important to them to make an icon of Dr. King, because they immediately went to work rewriting it, and they took him and distilled him down to just one statement. I have a dream. Been watered down and diluted down to just one statement, one sentence. That's it. I have a dream. That was it. Swept everything else he said off of the table, wouldn't replay anything else, wouldn't show anything else. They only showed I have a dream and only showed certain parts of it. That's what you've been force-fed now for decades. Force-fed that for decades. That's what it is. And that was all you needed to know. You didn't need to know anything else. You didn't need to know the letter from Birmingham jail. You didn't need to know the one that we keep playing here every year, where Dr. King says we're coming to get our check. You don't need to hear any of that. We were the ones who've kept the fires burning. We're the ones who've kept it alive. We're the ones who've kept playing that. We're the ones who have disputed at every turn that there was some huge conflict between Dr. King and Malcolm X, that they were actually both on the same side of things. We were the ones who did that. Now, all these decades later, the cracks are forming in the wall, and they're finally starting to concede it bit by bit, inch by inch. But do not be deceived. We've been saying this for the longest time. They're only saying it now because we wouldn't be beaten. They wouldn't be saying it today if we hadn't been relentless about this. They wouldn't be saying it today. So this is where they're at now, finally conceding what we've been saying now for years.
The book has also drawn attention for its revelation that King was less critical of Malcolm X than...
It's revelation. We've been saying this for over a decade. In my personal life, going on over 2 decades. This is a revelation? Who is it a revelation to? Well, of course, the society that you bamboozled and fooled.
That King was less critical of Malcolm X than previously thought. Ig found the original transcript of an interview King did with Alex Haley, who's the author who collaborated with Malcolm X on his autobiography.
Alex Haley. I'm stopping here again because you all have to understand that Malcolm X's autobiography, and Minister Louis Farrakhan talked about this when he spoke at Malcolm X College 25 years after Malcolm's assassination. Minister Farrakhan talked about this. And if any of you have ever heard the audio recording of Minister Farrakhan's speech at Malcolm X College, when he talked about that he said, you all didn't make the writings of Elijah Muhammad required reading. You didn't make the writings of Marcus Garvey required reading. You didn't make the writings of our elder warriors required reading, but you made the autobiography of Malcolm X required reading at your universities. You made it required reading. And he said, why? Why? And he said the reason for that was because you know that Malcolm was upset with the Nation of Islam at the time and that you could cherry pick things out of there that you could use. You could cherry pick things out of there that you could use. And that was the only reason that you wanted them to popularize that. So we are all going to have to make sure that when you hear the name Alex Haley, that you keep in mind that perhaps he wasn't just there by happenstance. Perhaps Alex Haley wasn't just there by chance. Perhaps Alex Haley was selected. Perhaps Alex Haley was selected. Yeah, we already know Alex Haley got agent work all over him. Alex Haley, for those of you who didn't know, Alex Haley had agent work on him. So keep in mind that for those of us going forward for the civil rights generation, Alex Haley was sent to go and be among the people. But now when we're going back over time and we're checking the paperwork and we're checking the documentations, you start finding that it's like, so were you supposed to be our selected biographer, our selected historian? Were you supposed to be that?
The transcript shows how Haley misquoted and even made up part of King's response. In fact, King never said Malcolm has done himself or our people a great disservice, and King's comment about fiery, demagogic oratory was not related to Malcolm X. To talk about all of this, we're joined in Chicago by Jonathan Eig. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Jonathan. This is an epic work. Congratulations on years of research and writing. Why don't we begin where I left off, on this expose around what Martin Luther King really thought of Malcolm X. Talk about the significance of how Alex Haley shaped the narrative for so many decades and who Haley was.
Alex Haley was one of the best-known African-American journalists of his era. He wrote...
Based on what, when you really get down to brass tacks, by the way?
For a lot of mainstream white publications like Reader's Digest.
Oh, shucky ducky. Well, that didn't take very long to get through the very first sentence now, did it? That didn't take very long at all to figure out where his credentials came from, huh?
Of Malcolm X. Talk about the significance of how Alex Haley shaped the narrative for so many decades and who Haley was.
Alex Haley was one of the best-known African-American journalists of his era. He wrote for a lot of mainstream white publications like Reader's Digest and Playboy. And the Playboy interview that he did with Martin Luther King was the longest interview, the longest published interview that King ever gave. So it had significant impact. It reached a lot of white readers who were not otherwise going to be exposed to such a long interview with King. And it's because of the comments that King made or supposedly made about Malcolm X. it's been handed down for decades, for generations, that this is what King actually thought about Malcolm X, and it was, as you pointed out in the introduction, largely fabricated.
And talk about how you found this out and what you understand King really thought.
Now, if this was fabricated, why didn't the editors, even if you're talking about Playboy, when they were not ogling the naked girls, where were the editors to confirm this, to do their work, to make sure that nobody's fabricating anything? Where were the editors on this? Where were the people who were supposed to make sure that journalistic integrity was intact on these things? Where the hell were they? Or were they doing their job, and that the job was to create distortion?
You pointed out in the introduction, largely fabricated.
And talk about how you found this out and what you understand King really thought about Malcolm X. They actually only met in person once, right, in Washington, D.C., although Malcolm X did go to Selma and talk about what he said to Martin Luther King's wife, Coretta Scott King.
Yes, the men only met once, and Malcolm did go. He was speaking in Tuskegee, and some students told him that King was in Selma. They could drive there and be there, within hours. So Malcolm X got in the car and drove to Selma. Did not get to meet King because he was in jail, but he did sit next to Coretta Scott King at a church rally and said to Coretta, let your husband know that I'm here, that I support him, and that maybe it's helpful to him in a way. If everybody knows that I'm the alternative, perhaps they'll be more willing to listen to Dr. King. And that's the truth. The truth of their relationship, as James Baldwin wrote, is that by the time of their deaths, they were pretty much indistinguishable in their philosophies. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but they were definitely moving toward each other. And
now, there is something that hasn't been stated over the last 40 years, over the last 50 years. That isn't at all the white corporate media narrative at all, except among us here, the young black people of the 1990s, who took matters into our own hands and said that we are going to create an accurate portrait of these men. So isn't this amazing what we've been saying the whole time? All of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, you all were right the whole time. You were right. No, there weren't this Professor Charles Xavier Magneto dichotomy between the two. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. There wasn't much daylight between the two of them at all by the time you get to the end of the 1960s. There wasn't much daylight between the two of them at all. But you notice the way, take a look at how long they've let that linger. See, that was supposed to become, myth. That was supposed to just become common knowledge. That's just supposed to be accepted wisdom. You weren't supposed to be questioning this. No one was supposed to be questioning this at all. You were just supposed to have this as accepted fact. No one questions it. That's it. Next subject. Now you find out, oh hell no, that's not at all what it was. It was exactly what we said it was the whole time. Now that the white man is saying it, maybe some other folks will believe it.
This quote in Playboy really did a disservice. It really misrepresented their relationship. One of the things that I do in any time I find a really good interview with the subject of a book that I'm working on is I'll go to the archives and try to find the original tapes or the original transcript of that interview to see what was left out. And that's really all I was doing when I went looking for the Alex Haley transcript of his interview with Martin Luther King. I wanted to see what got left out because, you can never really publish the full interview. You have to choose the best parts. But as I was reading through the transcript, I was shocked to discover that whole parts of it were moved around so that answers to questions were changed in their meaning, and some sections were completely fabricated. And King never said that he thought Malcolm's fiery oratory was doing a disservice to the black community. In fact, he said that about the Nation of Islam, but not specifically about Malcolm. And when asked about Malcolm, King actually expressed great open-mindedness. He said, "I don't agree when Malcolm X calls for violence, but I'm also not so arrogant to think that I have all the answers." And he's suggesting in this interview, the part that wasn't published, that he's open-minded to learning more and to talking more to Malcolm. That's one of the great things about King. He was always interested in listening to the people who disagreed with him.
So if you can talk about that kind of research that you did, Jonathan, and why you...
By the way, I want to back it up. I know it's kind of long. I understand it, but I want you all to listen to what he said here when she asked him about that information. I want you to listen to what he said.
Really did a disservice. It really misrepresented their relationship. One of the things that I do in any time I find a really good interview with the subject of a book that I'm working on is I'll go to the archives and try to find the original tapes or the original transcript of that interview to see what was left out. And that's really all I was doing when I went looking for the Alex Haley transcript of his interview with Martin Luther King. I wanted to see what got left out because, you can never really publish the full interview. You have to choose the best parts. But as I was reading through the transcript, I was shocked to discover that whole parts of it were moved around so that answers to questions were changed in their meaning. And
folks, what he's telling you is that this information's been around for 50 years. And that he was able to get to it relatively quickly. Will someone explain to me why ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and everybody else couldn't do this? Why is it that in all these decades, none of them went back to go and double check on this? Because you see, if we were disputing about the Egyptians and the pyramids, they would be doing all kinds of investigating. Of course, lying all the way, but I thought this was supposed to be basic journalism. This guy just said, well, all I did was say, you know what, I didn't just take the word for it from Playboy. I went to go get the original transcript to see exactly what was said. And lo and behold, as soon as you read it, yikes. All kinds of issues. Don't be thrown by the fact that he said the best parts, because that's standard. For example, it's not like if you talk to somebody, generally speaking, when you do an interview with somebody, you're going to do an interview with them for an hour, maybe 2 hours. You're not going to be able to get the whole 2 hours on 3 or 4 pages. That ain't going to happen. So whenever you're taking an interview and committing it to print, by definition, it's going to have to be limited because you may talk to them for a couple of hours, but you can't get a 2-hour interview on 3 or 4 pages. Furthermore, you don't even want to. Furthermore, that's not even what you want to do. Because as a documentarian, I will tell you, it's very rare that I talk to somebody and if I talk to him for 2 hours, that I've got a solid 2 hours where it's just rocking and rolling and here we go. That's rare. It can happen, but generally speaking, it doesn't. So don't get thrown by that part of it. Even if you're going to take out, the parts that are most relevant, even if you're going to take out the parts that may be of most interest at the time, even still, what you don't do is distort it. No matter what you do take out or whatever your reasons are for it, you don't distort it. So you take out the best parts of it, the most compelling parts of it, that's fine. But don't distort what you have taken out so that it changes the whole meaning and context because we got a story to give.
Transcript of that interview to see what was left out. And that's really all I was doing when I went looking for the Alex Haley transcript of his interview with Martin Luther King. I wanted to see what got left out because, you can never really publish the full interview. You have to choose the best parts. But as I was reading through the transcript, I was shocked to discover that whole parts of it were moved around so that answers to questions were changed in their meaning, and some sections were completely fabricated. And King never said that he thought that he thought Malcolm's fiery oratory was doing a disservice to the black community. In fact, he said that about the Nation of Islam, but not specifically about Malcolm. And when asked about Malcolm, King actually expressed great open-mindedness. He said, "I don't agree when Malcolm X calls for violence, but I'm also not so arrogant to think that I have all the answers." And he's suggesting in this interview, the part that wasn't published, that he's open-minded to learning more and to talking more to Malcolm. That's one of the great things about King. He was always interested in listening to the people who disagreed with him.
So if you can talk about that kind of research that you did, Jonathan, and why you chose to do a profile of King, not just a profile, an epic work. Talk about the other biographies that you wrote and how...
All right, we're going to leave that there. So now you all know you've heard it, the parts you need to hear here in its entirety. And when I discuss about falsifying black history, folks, no one was talking about the Black Wall Street. We had to be griots all through the decades, and it wasn't until we get to the 1990s that you have this major resurgence of discussion of the Black Wall Street, and everybody was talking about Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. And then we took it further by the time you get to the 2000s. Remember, folks, we're not talking about Wilmington, Rosewood, and all the Philadelphia and all the others. Nobody was talking about them until we get to the last decade or so. See, there's a whole rich history that's been there, and folks didn't even talk about that. It took us a century, almost a century, to get a resurgence of focus on the Black Wall Street, and this is after the Gap Band became international icons. So it took decades after the fact to be able to do this, to get that back in the popular consciousness, and then it took another decade or so after that to get it through the people that, hey, by the way, this is much bigger than Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. This is much bigger than Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. This is much bigger than Tulsa. Way bigger. Now they're discussing that. Now they're discussing the others while simultaneously trying to sweep them under the rug. Now they're discussing the others. But this is only a result of us standing firm. This is only a result of us not giving up the ghost and giving up the chase. This is only a result of us continuously insisting on saying this over and over and over again. Now everyone is taking this as common knowledge and settled law. Now they're doing it. But they weren't doing it all these decades. They weren't doing it then. This is why it is of deadly importance that we control our history and our narrative, because if you leave it up to them, they will simply eject whole parts of it. Next thing you know, you end up with black folk as a bumper sticker. And before too long, don't be deceived, the goal was to make it where Dr. King and Malcolm X would basically be mascots on a box of Wheaties. Something that can be commercialized and sold. But that the meaning of their lives and the essence of their existences would be diluted and taken out of them. And I mean that the way I said that. You'd have Dr. King on a bottle of Coke. And you'd have Dr. King on a box of chicken from KFC with no context of who in the world the man was. And at that point, they have won. They have gutted your history and destroyed it, because then you're going to have to wait for somebody else. Once they've rewritten it, it's practically impossible to reclaim it. That's why they got to work on Dr. King before the body was cold. They got to work on rewriting him before the body was cold. Because they understood what he was. We're going to have to rewrite him right now. We cannot wait a decade. We got to get on him today. Shout out J. Edgar Hoover and the LGBT community. But there are other folks out there. There are other people. And I want to touch on a few things here, because when we talk about controlling your narratives and controlling your language, couldn't help but notice this. While we've got a new contribution in our lives from Henry Skip Gates, The Gift That Keeps on Giving. And you are reading on your screen correctly there. The first 100 words of the Oxford Dictionary of African American English have been released. Here's a look at 10 of them.
Here with a preview of those new words is Dr. Tracy Weldon. She's an executive editor, and advisory board member of the Oxford Dictionary of African American English. Doctor, thank you for being with us. I think when people hear a dictionary of African American English, they immediately go to Dr. Williams Ebonics from the 70s and culture war fodder for the 80s and 90s. How is this different?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me.
By the way, y'all, I'm looking at this dude's beard line. Is that a spray on? What is going on with this fella's beard line, and what is going on? Will someone explain to me what is happening over there? Is that spray paint? What's going on? I don't get it. I'm lost.
How is this different?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me today. It is true that for most of the public, Ebonics is what comes to mind when we talk about African American language. But linguists have been researching African American language for decades now and understand that it is a comprehensive language that includes grammar and syntax and pronunciation. And of course, vocabulary. And so the goal of this dictionary is to really highlight the words and phrases that have been created or in some way reinvented by members of the African American speech community.
I just want y'all to understand, this is your Black academics. If you want to know what our Black academics are working on and what our Black academics are doing, from Skip Gates to Dr. Weldon here, if you want to know what your Black academics are doing, how they getting paid and what they're focusing on, just thought I'd stop for a moment here so you can see this is what they're focusing on.
And have contributed so much to the American English lexicon.
All right, so here are the first 10 words. I'm going to read them for the folks who can't see the screen or listening on radio. Aunt Hagar's children, bussin', cakewalk, chitterlings. I'm going to come back to that and the pronunciation. Grill.
One moment, please. Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience, everyone. Okay, because, yeah, just folks, people. Really? Just really? Aunt Hagar's children. I don't even know that one. Bussin'. Cakewalk. Chitlins. Chitlins? Is it just me? Chitlins? People. Chitlins. Really? Grill. Who in the... I would say who chose it, but we can see who chose it. We can see exactly who chose it. So on the one hand, I want to say who the hell chose these? We know exactly who it was.
Hagar's children, bussin', cakewalk, chitterlings. I'm going to come back to that and the pronunciation. Grill, kitchen, yes. Old school, pat, promised land, ring shout.
Kitchen. Kitchen is African American English. Kitchen. I mean, is this supposed to be their version of an urban slang dictionary? Is this supposed to be their version of that? Because I'm just going to be honest with you right here. I just see the language, this idea that black folks are speaking something different that promotes the idea that we don't know how to speak real English. That promotes that type of idea that we don't know how to speak no real English. Ooh, we bussin'. We can give credit to where slang terms might have come from without this idea that, oh, this is an alternative dictionary. As if we don't speak both languages, as if we don't speak all of it, as if we don't understand what a kitchen is. As if we don't understand. Promised land, ring shout. Someone to tell me what ring shout is, by the way.
So those are the first 10. Why these first?
So we've actually released the first 100 words, and those 10 were featured in a recent article published by the New York Times. The aim was to really just sort of show the breadth of what this project hopes to cover. So, you know, as noted, a lot of people really think of African American language as just slang, and there are certainly many slang terms that have been invented and innovated within the African American speech community, but it's much broader than that. And so we try to really focus on, you know, just the full breadth of the African American lexicon, starting.
Chitlins. Folks, is chitlins the full breadth of the African American lexicon? Chitlins? You all tell me. You all tell me. Is chitlins their contribution? So this is what we doing? Chitlins, grill. Really? Really? If you want to know what Skip Gates has been doing, if you want to know what Skip Gates has been doing, now you know. If you want to know what they've been up to, now you have some idea of what they've been doing. Now, despite what she said that there were actually 100 words, but I haven't been able to find anything that lists any of the others, just these 10. So if they would ever like to sit up here and give out the rest of them, I don't know. Maybe they're not so proud of them anymore. Maybe they're not so proud of them anymore. I don't know. Maybe they're not so happy about them. But if this is a preview of coming attractions, oh boy, I would hate to see what the rest of the list looks like if this is a preview of coming attractions. But then again, we could do a little bit more here. We could do a little bit more, because when you do go and look it up here, I want you to take a look at a little bit more. Oh, there's the man of the hour himself. There's old Skip Gates from the New York Times article here. An exclusive look at a dictionary consisting entirely of words created or reinvented by black people. Don't worry. All 3 variants of bussin' are included. By Miss Sandra E. Garcia. By Miss Sandra E. Garcia. And you can see Miss Garcia's picture down here. So, for Miss Garcia, thank you very much for contributing this article. Yeah, thanks for contributing that. We appreciate that. They're talking about Skip Gates here. They're going down here what occurred. You can see their name dropping other places here. And I wanted to go down here because you can see what they're showing here now. It's in April. They shared 10 entries with the New York Times. Interesting there. Then you keep going down. And they were showing another one on here. They were showing, they said they announced this. They said that they had announced this last spring. That's good. Here's from their announcement. I wanted to show you what was over there on that one. From their announcement here, you go down, and what else did they show you? Oh, example entries. Sedity. Affecting white middle-class values, especially characterized by an air of superiority, conceited, stuck up, also as adverb. Boo! A girlfriend or boyfriend, a lover, also as a form of address. Glad to see the Skip Gates is on the job. Glad to see the Skip Gates is doing God's work. Glad to see he's doing that. Glad to see he's on top of that. Folks, do you understand why we got to stay on top of this now? Oxford, no less than Oxford, is getting together to say we wish to immortalize, or in this case, to segregate from black folk. Because here's the thing, people. There's all kinds, when they put slang terms in the dictionary, they don't sit up here and say, here's the Irish American language dictionary. They don't say, here's the German American English dictionary. They don't say, here's the Italian American English dictionary. They just get their words put in with everything else. If they do, they just put one of those little annotations on it that says, this is of Irish descent or whatever. They would do that. With black folks, it's like, let's sweep your ass over here to the side. So for us, it's like, okay, we need to put y'all in your own dictionary over there by yourselves. Why don't you just include what we've done in the dictionary that you have now? Because you got dictionaries that include slang connotations. Why don't you just put us there where you got the others? Why can't we be listed with the others? Why is it we got to be put off in our own little section at the back of the bus? Why is it we can't be there with everyone else? So that it says that it's equally as valid? Why is it can't be there with everyone else? Because Skip Gates is like, well, you know what? If y'all pay me some extra money, I can go off on this little foreign etymological adventure. And this is why I've told you all, when it comes to our history, it's going to be us. We're going to have to do it. Let me ask you all a question right now. Think about this for just a few moments. What was the last major black historical work or presentation brought to the world by the HBCUs? I'll wait. Because everyone can name Hidden Colors. But what have the HBCUs done? Where is the HBCU project? Where's the HBCU one? Because I can show you from Columbia University for Jewish Studies. I can show you from Brandeis for Jewish Studies. I can show you for UCLA for Jewish Studies. But can you show me the historical project that was presented from your HBCUs about black history? Dr. John Henry Clark talked about this before he died. He said there's not a single HBCU that teaches a single African language. If these are supposed to be the schools that are supposed to be centers of black studies, okay, I'll take that. By the way, it's been over a decade since Hidden Colors started. Where's the historical efforts from them? It's been a decade since I started 7 a.m. and what I did, Amazon bestseller, and yet Black Enterprise Magazine hasn't done anything similar. What I'm telling you all is that your educational institutions, your academic institutions, your publishing institutions, they're not serving us. They're falsifying Black history. They're not reporting it nor repeating it. They're falsifying it. They have a vested interest in not discussing it. Very true. In many cases, the HBCUs were trying to discredit our work. How is it that you can have these schools that supposedly have all these educated Black folk with master's degrees and doctorates, PhDs, all these folk here with all these credentials, and yet nothing coming from them? Because I can show you one white man. I can show you one white man who made it his job to go and look into Dr. King and Malcolm X and to go actually go get the transcripts. You know, the kind of thing that we do here. I can show you one white man who did that. I can't show you the equivalent over here with these other folks. I can't really show you the equivalent. You think that's accidental? You think that's accidental? I submit to you it isn't. Here's what I'm telling you all. It's one thing to talk about etymology. It's one thing to talk about slang or dictionaries. Okay, that's fine and that's great and that's wonderful and all. But I'm asking you the next question. If you're telling us that these are the words, and I'll go ahead and take that, I'm saying these are the words and we're going where with it? Well, we need to document these kind of things. I get it. I got it. How did this get pushed to the front of the line? Because there's a lot of other things, more important things we could be discussing. How is it that Oxford is putting this kind of work behind this? I wonder if they're going to have terms of the revolutionaries. I wonder. Are they going to have the words of the revolutionaries? I'm just wondering if they're going to do that or if those will be left curiously, conspicuously absent. I'm asking that. I want to hit on this for a moment because I want you to understand that when we talk about falsifying the history leaves you unprepared for the present. Let me give you a reminder right here. When you falsify the history, it leaves you unprepared for the present. Now, this is from MSNBC a week or two ago, and I want you to hear how this went. You see the title of it on here, How Non-White People Are Embracing White Supremacy Ideology.
It's been just 7 days since the horrific mass shooting at an Allen, Texas outlet mall. While that community remains in mourning, authorities are in the process of nailing down the shooter's motive. The New York Times reports investigators trying to learn why a gunman murdered at least 8 innocent people, including children, at a Texas mall, are examining a social media profile rife with hate-filled rants against women and Black people, and they believe those belonged to the gunman. The shooter's profile also includes language praising Hitler with references to neo-Nazi websites like the Daily Stormer. The shooter's Hispanic heritage would include him in the growing number of non-white extremists pushing a white supremacist ideology. Joining me now is Christopher Goldsmith, intelligence, extremism, and disinformation analyst and the CEO of Task Force Butler. Chris, it's always so good to have you on the show. Sadly, though, it's usually around some type of mass shooting or some type of tragic event. But I think your voice is important for our viewers to really get some knowledge as to what's going on. You've infiltrated some far-right extremist groups yourself. You know their thought process in trying to lure in more people to spout off their disgusting rhetoric. There is a misconception that all white nationalists have to be white. But let's look at Hispanic white nationalists like Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio and online political activist Nick Fuentes. What have you seen in regards to non-white people becoming advocates for white supremacist ideas?
Thanks so much for having me, Katie, on. It's having me on, Katie. It's great to be back. The Latino identity, the Hispanic identity, the Latinx identity is incredibly complex. It is not exclusively a race. It is not exclusively an ethnicity. It creates a lot of room for extremist views like white supremacy. One of the phenomena that we've seen over especially recent years is misinformation, disinformation, and radical narratives being pushed into Spanish-speaking communities. Now, this is something that can have effects.
Now, first of all, I want to take you back to what this fella first said here. Now that I've let him talk for a moment here, I want to take you back to the first thing he said here.
Fuentes, what have you seen in regards to non-white people becoming advocates for white supremacist ideas?
Thanks so much for having me, Katie, on. It's having me on, Katie. It's great to be back. The Latino identity, the Hispanic identity, the Latinx identity is incredibly complex. It is not exclusively a race. It is not exclusively an ethnicity. It creates.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because the new black media has been saying this now for over a decade. We've been saying this for over a decade, and in the comment sections everywhere you have folk trying to argue with you. He's not white, he's Latino. He's not white, he's Hispanic. George Zimmerman's not white, he's Hispanic. We've been saying that the whole damn time. We have never changed. We've been saying this the entire time. The Latino and Hispanic are not races. And the corporate white media was never embracing this or accepting this, but just like the changeover from saying racism to white supremacy, we remain persistent and insistent until finally even your corporate media outlets now have to say white supremacy. They don't say racism. We were the ones who kept beating and busting on the doors, bussing, until finally they caved in. But it wasn't because that's what they wanted to do. So now when it comes to Hispanic and Latino, now all of a sudden, why, this guy is breaking news on MSNBC. How the hell can he be breaking news when we said this forever ago? Folks, this is falsifying history. If you don't keep track of the history, you lose control of the present. So the whole reason why we're able to say this now, the whole reason why they're conceding to this now is because we opened that door a long damn time ago. Otherwise, they would just, remember, they were saying that they were all, quote, minorities like us. Did you get that? Before now, they were saying that, well, they're all minorities like you. We were the ones who've been pushing back forever and saying, no, you're not going to lump us all together because we're not. But before now, they were saying, well, all of y'all are minorities. They're minorities like you. So, we'll just lump you in with everybody else. We push back against that. So now when incidents like this occur, that you can't say it's a minority issue. Now you're going to have to be specific for exactly where it comes from. So now that we have forced you to be specific for where it comes from, when we say the words reparations, then it's very clear to everyone why we are making a distinction. So you ain't gonna lump us together when it's time to discuss reparations, because we're making it very clear why we need it and who in fact are the groups and the people who have collaborated with the white supremacist establishment against us. That you've got white supremacist elements everywhere outside of the descendants of the slaves. You've got white supremacist elements everywhere in all those groups you try to lump us in with. That's why we said, no, you ain't gonna lump us in anymore. So when this kind of thing right here happens, you damn right. We have made a very clear distinction. So when we discuss reparations, yeah. Oh, no. It don't need to go over there. It needs to all come over here. Because we've already distinguished ourselves from everybody else. This is the power of doing so. This is the necessity of doing so. Now you're seeing everybody saying, oh, okay. They didn't want to make this concession because now when you discuss reparations, like, yeah, because take a look at the folks who are joining forces with the white supremacists. See, it becomes a whole lot easier to make that argument now that you've beaten them into submission. Now that they've been beaten into submission, becomes a whole lot easier to make this argument now. The 720 degrees of analysis that you'll receive nowhere else.
The Latinx identity is incredibly complex. It is not exclusively a race. It is not exclusively an ethnicity. It creates a lot of room for extremist views like white supremacy. One of the phenomena that we've seen over especially recent years is misinformation, disinformation, and radical narratives being pushed into Spanish-speaking communities. Now, this is something that can have...
Okay, now once again, this is a misnomer. They brought this guy on to be their expert on this. This is a misnomer. This is a misnomer. This is not falsehood. This is not bad things that are being introduced. These are already there. That's the point we've always made, is that most of your so-called Latinos identify as white. It's only the media, for the purposes of displacing black people, that all of a sudden they can get to spread out and they get to bleed over and get to claim a white or non-white status when they choose. But this isn't new. Remember, I've been telling you all now for over a decade that these folks are coming from places that already have well-entrenched anti-black cultures. Mexico, Puerto Rico, hell, Dominican Republic, you want to be honest. While all these dudes out here talking about they love them Dominican girls, by the way, Dominican Republic, yikes. Shout out to the 3 statues, yikes. Brazil, even Venezuela, Colombia. You go down the damn list. They've got well-established, well-entrenched anti-black cultures that are historical. Been there the whole time. This isn't something that was brought to them. This was something that was already there. So for this guy to sit up here and act like, oh, well, you know, there's some influences being brought in. They're falling prey to them. Falling prey my ass! They brought them with them. They brought them with them. You can go see this in Central and South America now. Why do you think the Nazis went there after World War II? This isn't new. This isn't something that's being, misinformation online and the internet spreading conspiracy theories. This isn't new. These are the cultures from where they came from, which is the whole point that we've been making the whole time. I've been saying this to you all for over a decade. When folks said, Jason Black, how in the hell did you call the 2016 election the way you did? I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood. By the way, I ain't bull jiving. I took you step by step, state by state, and I told everybody here, you can go back and go watch it for yourselves. I told everyone here, Trump's going to win Florida. Because for those of you who ain't been to Florida or seen what's going on, you don't understand. Marco Rubio's not going to beat Trump in Florida. There's a whole bunch of New Yorkers come down there. And the Latinos who are down there identify as conservatives or white or both. I went state by state, line by line, and then it broke down exactly the way I said. The corporate media got it wrong. Your old dead black media wasn't even on the board. Only one place got that right, when you examine the facts. Because I know the history and I know the present. I'm looking at the facts on the ground. I'm saying this is what's going to happen. And it did. And it did. I'm telling folk here, I'm sitting up here watching. These folks are on TV. These folks are at their rallies. You see their parades. They're identifying as white. They're identifying as a different ethnicity of white. A different ethnicity, but not a different race. And when it comes down to it, when it breaks down, They claiming white. They're claiming white.
For extremist race. It is not exclusively an ethnicity. It creates a lot of room for extremist views like white supremacy. One of the phenomena that we've seen over especially recent years is misinformation, disinformation, and radical narratives being pushed into Spanish-speaking communities.
But by whom? He's not, sir. Okay, it's being pushed into him, but you got to go into detail about who exactly is pushing it. Is it being pushed into Spanish-speaking communities by non-Spanish-speaking people, or is it being spread in Spanish-speaking communities by Spanish-speaking people? Because if you don't clarify that and make that clear, then you're making a distortion that somehow they're just not used to this. They have no association with this. They don't identify with it. And then, the rest of us are just messed up. That they're victims of disinformation is what he's saying. They're victims of disinformation. Not sources of this, but victims of it.
Now, this is something that can have effects far down the street. Now, this particular guy, this disgusting shooter in Texas, he's someone who acknowledged his Latino identity, and he expressed on his social media displeasure at not being traditionally considered white by his peers. But he's someone who embraced extremism.
Now, did you hear that? He expressed displeasure of not being embraced as traditionally white by his peers. This is what we've been saying forever. Tom Joyner and the old black media would never say this. We've been saying this forever. You got a whole bunch of folks out here who wish they could identify as Anglo. They wish they could be truly Anglo. But they don't have an avenue to be completely white. So they either hang with black folk and hate us on the low, or they go around doing their best wannabe Anglo impression, and the wannabe Anglo impression is always, always, always rooted in how anti-black can you be. And, well, Jason, he went after other Latinos. Folks, why did you do that? Because he doesn't have any black folk in vicinity to go after. He's going after them because he knows what it represents. They are considered less than white. Why are they considered less than white? They're considered less than white because they are seen as having African admixture on some level. You're less than white. Can't find a real black person? Go get some stand-ins. Show to the dominant society that this is what you're about. Show to the dominant society that this is what you're about. So when this guy sits up here and tells you that somehow it's been brought to them without giving any context to what the hell that means, brought to them how? In what way? As opposed to saying that, no, this is something that's already there and it gets spread around in different flavors, in different iterations. This is something that's already there. They're already striving for whiteness. They're already striving for not just white acceptance, but white classification. That's what we've been saying forever. We've been saying that forever. Which is why we had to start calling folks out and saying, do you identify as Latino or do you identify as white? Because your so-called Afro-Latinos, we discovered here decades ago. We better start asking some questions. Shout out Gina Torres. Shout out Zoe Zaldana. We started asking some questions because we recognize that when you got these Afro-Latinos, when they start saying they're Latino, we're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Well, my mom, my dad, and my grandma, my abuela, my abuela, bisabuela, my abuela or my bisabuela. But when you get around us, you think you're going to play both sides of the fence. You get around black people, and all of a sudden you're claiming black all of a sudden, but that's not really where you want to be. So when you get around white folk, all of a sudden you're Latino. All of a sudden you're Latino. So we recognized the game, and that's when we changed up over a decade ago and said, just ask them what they identify as if they don't say black, kick them to the curb. Oh, I'm biracial. Off you go. Boot. Latino. Off you go. Boot. Yeah, Kamala Harris. I'm Asian. Off you go. Boot. So we understood that early. We've been harping on this now for over a decade. They come to you with that Latino thing. You know what the deal is. They think they're going to play both sides of the fence. If they cannot solidly say what they are, if they will not solidly claim blackness, then they're letting you know, I think I'm going to play y'all for suckers. You're not going to play us for suckers because you see yourself as a black Spaniard. You're not fooling us. See, they think that up until now what's happened is that we kind of been off on our own little thing. So we didn't understand the rationales. If you don't come from a place like New York City, then you don't understand that when you hear these Afro-Latinos, you don't understand what they really mean. So they go places, and because they can speak Spanish, they see that as the primary identification or point of connection between them and, quote, their real people. So yeah, they might be dark-skinned, but because they speak Spanish, that is their connection to the culture, is the language. And all the goodies and benefits that go along with it. So that's what they rely on is, well, I can speak Spanish, therefore I have a kinship with these other people. I just have a similarity in appearance to you. My appearance to you black folk, there's a similarity in appearance, but my real connections with these other folks over here. And the killing part about it is everybody in New York City damn well knows that if you're black and you speak in Spanish, them white Latinos make it very clear you ain't one of them. They quick to correct you on your Spanish. They quick to check you on that. For those of you who don't know about that and how that works, they're quick to check you on that and let you know you ain't speaking true Spanish. The white Latinos will be quick to correct you on that. To my folks in California, that's a damn litmus test is how well you speak the language. How well you speak the language in California among the Latinos. To my black folk in California, stand up. For any of y'all who dealt with Latinas out there or Latinos, male or female, if you spend any time, those of you in the education system, you know that how well you speak, number one, if you speak Spanish, and number two, how well you speak it. That's a litmus test. But it's a litmus test that is only invoked if you're black. It's only invoked if you are black. Now, they don't invoke it on each other on the non-black side, but if you're black, here comes that litmus test. For those of you who didn't know, I've traveled the country coast to coast, seen it in person. So when they say they're Latino, you recognize what they're really saying. What they're really saying is, I'm not like y'all. And I'm like, you know what? Then go over there and not be like us. And by the way, here comes the shooter. You go over there. But don't lump us in with these other folk, because then it makes it impossible to distinguish them from us. Then you think that their problem is our problem, and it isn't.
Because he was basically a loser. That was his way to find a sense of community. That was his way of finding purpose. And now that type of extremism is being promoted by folks like Enrique Tarrio, like you mentioned, like Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes only became famous because he participated in the neo-Nazi Charlottesville riot and then dropped out of school because he was too much of a coward to face his classmates back in Boston. That's the only reason anyone knows his name. It's the only reason that he was able to create a platform. Now he makes money from racists around the country, actually around the world, who.
Okay, then, sir, you need to ask yourself a question. How the hell is it that he's able to make money from them around the world? How is he able to do that? That's the question you need to be asking. How in the world is he able to do that? I keep asking y'all, this guy keeps talking about the source of these things like it's some outside invasion moving in. No, this is homegrown. He's acting as if, oh, these are white folk who are influencing these Spanish-speaking people. These are white folk who are influencing these Latinos. No, they're not. That's not the case at all.
Who found him to be a useful idiot for white supremacy.
You know,
this kind of colored, loaded language doesn't do us any good. This doesn't do us any good whatsoever. By the way, Miss Fang, I hope that's not a wig on your head or whatnot. The Clairol people have done you good. I will say that. Her hair looks like Alex Wagner's, so either they all got the same stylist, the same wig, or the Clairol people or the Clairol people are doing great work over there at the studio. Couldn't help but notice if you removed her face and put Alex Wagner's face there or somebody else's, it would fit right in. Couldn't help but notice. You'll fit right in at the Chinese New Year parade. You'll fit right in, Miss Fang. You'll fit right in, ma'am. All right.
Chris, the misinformation, you just mentioned it, it plays a major rise and a major role in that rise of white nationalism. According to a Nielsen report, Latino audiences are more likely to receive, consume, and share fake news and misinformation online compared to the general population. And in fact, the Daily Stormer, which the shooter in Allen, Texas, he was an avid consumer of that website. They actually launched a Spanish language version of that neo-Nazi website in 2017. Do you find that there is a direct correlation between the consumption of misinformation and white supremacy?
So you get that. The Daily Stormer and the Stormfront. Of all the things they could do, they launched the Spanish version. Now, you can only do that if you got people who can post Spanish stuff. You can only do that if you can get that if they post Spanish stuff. Who can speak the language well enough to be able to articulate white supremacy in Spanish terms? Who can do that? Y'all, this is what I'm telling you all to understand. This isn't the white guys creating something. What they're letting you know is that being Hispanic is not incompatible with white supremacy. That's what they're telling you. What we've been saying now for over a decade with folks trying to shut us down online and everything else. They told us, no, that's not true. They told us they're not white. Oh, they're impervious and immune from white supremacy because they're not white people. And what these folks are telling you is even your hardest white supremacists are saying, no, being Latino is not incompatible with white supremacy. Not at all. These will be the same folks up here who are going to try to act shocked when they tell you that being Asian is not incompatible with white supremacy. That's what they're going to tell you. They haven't accepted that one yet. We've been beating the drum on that one. They're still fighting and kicking and screaming and yelling at us that, oh, there's some distinction. We ain't backing down from that one. We're not giving up any ground on that one. But by the way, now that they're slowly conceding what we've been saying for over a decade, going on 2 decades, that being Latino is not incompatible with white supremacy. As a matter of fact, it fits hand in glove. Next, they're going to be fighting over the Asian thing. And they're not going to give that one up easy, but yeah, you're going to have to. But you understand, when that one falls, down goes Kamala Harris. When that one falls, down goes Kamala Harris. See, that's why they don't want to give that one up now. because they got some of them that they think on the inside and can play the double agent role. But if you sit up here and say that being Asian is not incompatible with being white supremacist, next thing you know, you're looking side-eye at Kamala Harris before you even walk in the door.
I used to be a misinformation and disinformation analyst. That's what I came from. I used to work for Vietnam Veterans American. What made me an investigator of any kind was back in 2017, I found a fake version of my employer online on Facebook that had 500,000 followers. Long story short, that ended up being a Russian intelligence operation. I published what's called the Troll Report back in 2019. I moved away from studying Russian trolls and into domestic extremism because I think the threat that misinformation and disinformation poses, while severe, is not as immediate as the extremism that it has caused. Now, when it comes to targeting the veterans community, the Hispanic community, the Black community, these foreign actors and domestic actors recognize that these identities that are core to who we are in our human psychology can be leveraged to turn us against others. Doesn't matter.
Sir, it's not being leveraged to, quote, turn us against each other. They're already against us. That's the point we've been making for damn me ever. They're not on their way. They're already against us. He's trying to see it from the top view. Okay, well, you're all minorities or all this, that. No, sir. They've always been targeting us. They're already against us. You talking about these international players or domestic players? Man, what are you talking about? David Duke's been domestic all my life. What the hell are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about? They're already against us. The only thing they go to Stormfront for is it's like church. It's just a place that emotionally reinforces what they already believe. They're not going to Stormfront to find out something they don't already know. They're going to Stormfront to get encouragement for what they're already doing. So for him to say this is a gross distortion. They didn't find white supremacy isn't being disseminated online. Oh, they're being misled. They're not being misled to a damn thing. This is exactly what they already believe. They're already there. What you're doing right now, sir, this is disinformation by leading people to believe this is being done by, quote, foreign actors or domestic actors for that matter. It's already in the culture. Nobody had, the internet didn't teach these racist Asian store owners, politicians, both in America and overseas. We didn't teach them that. The internet didn't teach China to mistreat black people. The internet didn't teach Japan to mistreat black people. The internet didn't teach any of them that. That wasn't something that the internet taught them. That wasn't something that was spread on Facebook. They brought that over here and then join or create Facebook groups where they can practice it. So what he's saying and what he's doing is misinformation.
No matter who you are, if someone is trying to manipulate you, they are going to target who you consider yourself to be, what your values are. They will try and shift those values and then present enemies, the other, as someone to be attacked, someone to be blamed. I mean,
you can't say that when it's already a fixture in the culture. He's acting as if somebody's taking advantage of something. It's already a fixture in the culture. It's already there. This isn't some foreign entity that was introduced by some weirdos somewhere. This is already there. It's already there. I want to get a lot heavier off into this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and just take a brief non-commercial break. When I come back, I want to bring this home. I want to bring this home to us and where we are here. I want to bring this home to where we're at now, to show you exactly how this works, to beat this over the head, to remind you about how falsifying history is a deadly thing. But I am not doing this tonight. This is not a woe is me. I'm doing this to remind you that we're on the right track. Don't come to me with your woe is me-ism. We're on the right track. But I want to remind you about the cost of being on the right track, how we ended up on the right track, and the cost of being there. Before we do, I want to take a moment here to thank everyone who has contributed to support tonight's program on PayPal, CashApp, Super Chat. B1 Media is a lifesaver. Chadwick, thank you very much for your support here, sir. We appreciate that. Big shout out here to Brenda and everyone else who supported tonight's program. We come back. Let me put this in its proper context for you. This is the Black Channel.
Are you ready to take the next step in your career or business? With Higher Life Recruiting and Consulting, you can get the help you need to reach your goals. Our experiences span multiple industries, giving us the ability to source top talent across various fields. We specialize in STEM and high-tech industries, but we are equally adept at recruiting and professional services. Our services include career consulting, resume writing, LinkedIn consulting, interviewing, lead generation, sourcing, and talent mapping. Follow us on Instagram at Get Higher With Us.
A white supremacist assassin seeks revenge. Corrupt FBI agents with evil intentions. Dangerous black collaborators dedicated to treason. Occam Jeffers must defeat them all and somehow survive. One misstep and he's a dead man. Join Occam Jeffers as he looks the devil in his blue eyes and tells him, Black first. A sequel to the underground hit War of the Heart, Spirit of 1811 Publishing presents God Love Us, on sale at Amazon. Pre-order and save today. Visit spiritOf1811publishing.com and show your love.
Having computer problems? Is your PC or Mac running slow? Need help building a gaming PC? Having problems with your Apple or Android device? Call or text Fix Too Fast. We can fix common and uncommon computer software issues remotely, anywhere, nationwide, from the comfort of your home or business. Are you having hardware issues with your PC or Mac? Ship it to us and we will ship it back fixed. Call 1-877-412-9890 or text 513-440-1646 to speak to a technician. Please visit our website at www.fixtoofast.net.
Order yours today to experience all the benefits of Ash Kickin' natural body butter. With skin so smooth and soft, you'll thank us for it. Shop Ash Kickin' online. That's ASHKICKIN.com.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. My name is Joe Jackson. I'm a foundational Black American, and I entered the field of IT with the goal of helping the family globally. The industry's been changing, and I've learned a lot. But how did we get here? How do we navigate issues we face in the workplace? How can we get our house in order? Read The Concept and Intricacies of Being Black in IT, now on Amazon, as well as the best-selling Guide to Being Black in IT. Go to beingblackinit.com.
More Threads, a brand owned by a descendant of Black American freedmen, was created to uniquely address Black American history and contributions that have been intentionally hidden and suppressed. Use their apparel and more to learn and share the Black American history of Black inventions, heroes, towns, Black business districts, and more. Sign up and support not only a Black-owned business, but a movement at www.morethread.co.
Hi, this is Brenda Starr, creator of Poetry with a Purpose and author of the book Pressed But Not Crushed. Pressed But Not Crushed is an anthology of political poems that address current and historical issues in American descendants of slave population and African American population. The book describes slaveries and its residuals, Jim Crow segregation, social depredation, and other relevant issues to American descendants of slaves and African Americans, including the current political climate that does not address our issues.
This is The Black Channel. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the Black Authority. Very glad to be with you all here this evening. We've been investigating about falsifying Black history. We've been discussing falsifying Black history. And I want to take this as a moment to give you probably a very big reminder of why we're doing what we're doing. Because just yet another reminder has come down here. There is a story here coming out of the New York Times about down in Oklahoma, by the way. Shows here that 2 Black members of Native tribes were arrested. The law sees only one as Indian. The Supreme Court ruling barred Oklahoma from prosecuting crimes committed by Native Americans on tribal land, but some Black tribal members are still being prosecuted because they lack, quote, Indian blood. Let's get to the bottom of this. This is Michael J. Hill here. He's the subject of the story. We'll come back to that in a moment here. Says here, the early one morning in September 2020, Michael J. Hill called the police after hearing banging on the doors and windows of his home in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, part of a swath of that state that the Supreme Court had recently ruled to be tribal land. He eventually realized it was a group of his friends. Mr. Hill later recalled in an interview, but the police had arrived and proceeded to arrest one of them, Aaron R. Wilson, for an outstanding warrant. Mr. Hill, 40, then got into an altercation with the police and was himself arrested after the struggle. Mr. Hill and Mr. Wilson are both Black and citizens of Native American tribes in Oklahoma. They both moved to have their cases dismissed, arguing that as tribal members in tribal territory, they were outside of the state's criminal jurisdiction. Mr. Wilson's case was dismissed, but Mr. Hill's request was denied. The key difference in the fate of the 2 men was race, specifically a small degree of what is known in the courts as, quote, Indian blood. Mr. Wilson is 164th Creek Indian. Did y'all get that? Mr. Wilson is 164th Creek Indian. Mr. Hill is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation through ancestors called Freedmen. Black people who were enslaved by Native tribes. Because Mr. Hill's ancestors did not have Indian blood, he was found in court not to be Indian. Quote, he's a member of the Cherokee Nation, Philip Peake, Mr. Hill's lawyer, said in court arguments. Yet when he steps in this courtroom, all of a sudden he's not. Mr. Hill is one of several present-day freedmen, as they are known, for their ancestry. Y'all got to understand, when you hear folk use terms like freedmen, Marcel Dixon and others, these are terms that mean something. They have historical precedent and they mean things. They mean very specific things. Over the decades, by refusing to discuss this, by distorting the facts or dismissing it altogether, folks sitting up here either distorting what was said or just tearing things out altogether, you grow up here and don't realize that, by the way, if you're 1/64th or less, as long as you have something resembling, quote, Indian blood, you can claim it. With them not letting you know that. It says here, Mr. Hill is one of several present-day freedmen, as they are known of their ancestry, who have been caught in the middle of a feud between the state of Oklahoma and tribal nations after the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that much of eastern Oklahoma falls within an Indian reservation. So those of you who don't remember, I talked about this before. Damn near half the state of Oklahoma is actually an Indian reservation, technically. Their dilemma stems from federal court rulings that define what it means to be considered Indian in the eyes of the criminal justice system. After the Supreme Court's decision in the case McGirt versus Oklahoma, hundreds of people successfully had their criminal cases in state courts dismissed, as the ruling prevents state authorities from prosecuting offenses committed by Native Americans on tribal land. Instead, those offenses can now be prosecuted only by tribal and federal authorities. But state prosecutors have fought to continue pursuing some criminal cases involving freedmen in tribal territory. In several cases reviewed by the New York Times, judges rejected arguments by freedmen that they were outside the state's criminal jurisdiction, ruling that the defendants did not meet the legal definition to be considered Indian. Oklahoma's highest criminal court sided with the state, no surprise there, in one of those cases, paving the way for state prosecutors to continue bringing cases against freedmen who are tribal citizens but have no Indian blood. Interesting how that bar just gets higher for you. The state's continued prosecution of freedmen amounts to a new chapter in their long struggle to receive all the rights of tribal citizenship. Some freedmen are not even allowed to become tribal citizens because a handful of tribes exclude them from membership. Now, that's a more recent thing, but it goes to show you a lot. They're being treated differently than other members of the tribe based solely on their race. Matthew J. Ballard, a district attorney in northeast Oklahoma and the chair of the state's district attorney's council, said of the prosecution of freedmen in the state court, freedmen who want to be considered Indian in court have, quote, a nearly impossible burden to meet, he said. The state of Oklahoma argues that the McGirt decision has created an unequal legal system where tribal citizens have special privileges. You mean like white folk? State officials have said that crimes that fall under tribal jurisdiction go unaddressed and have highlighted cases of convicted criminals being released as a result of the ruling. In 2021, Oklahoma went as far as to ask the Supreme Court to overrule its own decision. Last year, the court instead narrowed the ruling. That's political. You didn't get it right the first damn time. Last year, the court narrowed the ruling, allowing state authorities to prosecute non-Indians who commit crimes against Indians on tribal land. Tribal nations have said that the state officials have at times refused to cooperate with their courts and police officers, and that working relationships with state agencies have soured after the McGirt ruling. Tribal nations in Oklahoma have criminal justice systems that are generally less punitive than the state's. Federal law limits sentencing in tribal courts for any criminal charge to 3 years and a $15,000 fine, and major crimes that occur in tribal territory are prosecuted in federal court. So now you can see why they want to go after us so badly. It goes on to say that caught up in the dispute are the freedmen, the descendants of black people who were enslaved by native tribes. Many tribes allied themselves with the Confederacy and fought to preserve the institution of slavery. After the Civil War, treaties between the federal government and the tribes abolished slavery and granted freedmen, quote, all the rights of citizens in the tribal nations. But courts have typically used a two-part test to determine who is legally considered to be Indian. Did you get that? Let me read that again so that you understand this clearly and plainly. Caught up in the dispute are the Freedmen, the descendants of black people who were enslaved by native tribes. Many native tribes allied themselves with the Confederacy and fought to preserve the institution of slavery. After the Civil War, treaties between the federal government and the tribes abolished slavery and granted the freedmen all the rights of citizens in the tribal nations. Now, this obviously was so that the federal government would be like, okay, y'all are members of the Native Americans, you're part of a separate government, so we don't really have to count you within the United States anymore. It's kind of a way of divesting yourself, if you will, of those black people. But listen next. But courts have typically used a two-part test to determine who is legally considered to be Indian, whether the person is recognized as an Indian by a tribe or the federal government, and whether the individual has Indian blood. Most freedmen, even if they are enrolled in a tribe, do not satisfy the blood requirement, meaning they are not recognized as legally Indian in court. And I wonder if your $5 white Indians meet the requirement, by the way. I wonder if they meet the requirement, or is someone even challenging it? They challenge us on everything. Anybody want to tell you about they can't figure out where we came from and they can't figure out who the descendants of the slaves are? Yes, they can. They're telling you right here. They sure can. They're telling you right here that they sure can. Quote, sometimes the state courts will say, well, even though you might meet Part A, you can't meet Part B of this test. Therefore, we are not going to dismiss your case from the state courts, said Sarah Hill, the attorney for the Cherokee Nation, the Attorney General for the Cherokee Nation. It is unclear how many freedmen who are tribal citizens, have been prosecuted in state courts since the McGirt decision, because state officials have not specifically tracked those cases. Mr. Ballard, the district attorney, said prosecutors in Oklahoma had been frustrated by having to navigate sensitive issues about race and identity. So because you're frustrated by it, you don't have to adhere to it? Quote, we're having to inquire as to the racial identity of people that we're prosecuting, Mr. Ballard said. That is new territory for us. Yeah, they're used to just being able to say, okay, he's black, lock him up. Frankly, it's a little offensive, he said, and we don't like having to do that, but that's what the case law is. Now listen to this next part. Long before the legal wrangling over criminal prosecutions, rules surrounding Indian blood had been used by tribes to segregate and even expel the descendants of freedmen. The Muskogee, or Creek Indians, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations still exclude freedmen from membership, making it harder for them to seek tribal jurisdiction. Marilyn Vann, a Cherokee Nation citizen and the president of the Descendants of the Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribes Association, said the discriminatory practices of the tribes were now being wielded by the state of Oklahoma in criminal cases. The discriminatory practices of the tribes are now being used by the state of Oklahoma in criminal cases. So when I tell you here that we have to make sure that you understand your history, so when you have black folk fighting with themselves to identify as Native American, that you are, or Indian, that you are very clear about what that means and what our history with them actually is, not some fantasy in your head that you get to go cosplay as one of them. I have warned you all now for over a decade that when it comes to biracial people, for example, their biraciality only exists to the extent that you can get white society to honor it. You can't really claim to be biracial, because by saying that you're biracial, you're saying you're black and something else. Here's the problem. You can't get the white society to honor your something else claim. You can't get them to sign on to your something else claim. You don't get to jump among them and say, hey, I'm one of y'all because I'm black and something else. They won't honor your quote unquote whiteness. They won't honor it. And since they won't honor it, you don't have a claim. Quote, overturning this policy would take an act of Congress or another ruling from the high courts, Ms. Vann said, of the state's prosecution of freedmen, adding, quote, if no one is able to take this higher up the ladder, I doubt it's going to change. What I want to do, I want to show you another article. I want to show you another New York Times article here. This one is from 2021. And I'm not going to go too far deep into it, but this one is from 2021. And I want to review some of what it says. I think you'll find this to be very pertinent and very relevant. It says, tribes to confront bias against descendants of enslaved people. The Choctaw Nation and the Muskogee Creek Nation in Oklahoma said that they would consider granting citizenship to the Freedmen. On your screen right here is David Hill, the principal chief of the Muskogee or Creek Nation. With pressure growing from the Biden administration, 2 Native American tribes in Oklahoma have agreed to consider reversing their policies of denying citizenship to descendants of black people who were enslaved by them before the Civil War. Don't believe this first sentence. This is a lie. The New York Times, of course, is going to go right in with the propaganda. Don't believe it. Once you get down into the details of it, you find out, oh, the New York Times is lying again. Because they understand that Biden was very weak coming out of the 2020 election, so they want to make sure that they got stuff you can go back to and say, oh, he always been on the case for black folk. No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. The tribes, the Choctaw Nation and Muskogee Creek Nation, said they would take initial steps to address the long-running demands of the descendants that they be granted equal rights as tribal citizens, an issue that has split their communities and highlighted clashes over identity and racism among Native Americans. Folks, they are not minorities like us. They are not. But the 2 tribes stopped short of a commitment to grant citizenship to the black descendants, who are known as freedmen, instead saying that they would open discussions about the issue. Sounds like somebody says we'll have a committee, we'll have a commission. In February, the Cherokee Nation eliminated from its constitution language that based citizenship on being descended from, quote, by blood, tribal members listed on a federal census. Wait till you hear the name. The biggest step by a tribe so far to resolve the issue. Those tribes and others, which had originally inhabited the Southeast, purchased enslaved black people as laborers in the 18th and 19th centuries and had brought them along when they were forcibly relocated by the federal government in a deadly ordeal known as the Trail of Tears. Wait a moment. Are you telling me that the red Native Americans, while they sit up here and decry the Trail of Tears, it was dehumanizing, it was a violation of their rights, their human rights, and they were dragging black slaves along with them on the Trail of Tears? No wonder they want to stop teaching history now. So your red Native Americans, while they were complaining and decrying the taking of their land, the killing of them, the disinvestment of their human rights, and while they were walking in the very Trail of Tears, they had people whose human rights they were denying, that they were dragging along with them. They didn't even have the scruples or the honor to leave them where they were. They said, damn it, if we gonna be at the bottom of the ladder, you gonna be under our feet, even during the Trail of Tears. Man. Time to update those history books, ain't it? It says here that post-Civil War treaties in 1866 gave the formerly enslaved people all the rights of tribal citizenship, but in practice, they were segregated, and their citizenship rights later denied by a requirement that they be descended from non-black tribal citizens who were on the census lists more than a century ago. A situation that prompted increasing protests in recent years. Quote, today we reach out to the Choctaw Freedmen. We see you. We hear you. We look forward to a meaningful conversation regarding our shared past. Gary Batten, chief of the Choctaw Nation, said in a letter announcing that the nation would consider, quote, tribal membership for Choctaw Freedmen. David Hill, the principal chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation, also wrote to the tribe's National Council proposing town hall events and a period of public comment to discuss citizenship for Creek freedmen. Freedmen said the tribes took action only after being pushed into it. Wait for details, folks. By the way, remember, this is Mr. Hill here. We'll come back to that. Freedmen said the tribes only took action after being pushed into it. Quote, Black Indians were a part of this tribe, the Choctaw Nation. They lived in the Choctaw Nation, said Verdi Triplett, a descendant of both Choctaw and Chickasaw freedmen, and who lives on the Choctaw Reservation in Fort Coffee, Oklahoma. He added, quote, for them to do this now, they didn't do it on their own. This right here is a prime example of pressure. The announcement from the Choctaw Nation followed a statement this month from Deb Haaland, the first Native American Secretary of the Interior, addressing the freedmen of Native American nations in Oklahoma and acknowledging their rights as citizens of the tribes that had enslaved them. So this is what the New York Times is referring to as the Biden administration. Let's see what she does. Quote, the Cherokee Nation's actions, Ms. Holland said, referring to the tribe's decision to amend its constitution in February to grant equal status to the freedmen population, has fulfilled, quote, their obligations to the Cherokee freedmen. Really? Really? Because I don't see it that way. We encourage other tribes to take similar steps to meet their moral and legal obligations to the freedmen, Ms. Holland said, naming 4 other Native American nations in Oklahoma, the Muskogee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole, that had owned slaves and allied themselves with the Confederacy to preserve slavery as an institution. With those words, Ms. Holland waded into a painful reckoning within Native American nations in Oklahoma that has historically owned slaves. Changes to the Choctaw Constitution in 1983 and the Muskogee Creek Constitution in 1979 required that a citizen of the nation must be descended from, quote, by blood citizens, disqualifying the freedmen who were counted separately in the federal census known as the Dawes Rolls in 1906. The Cherokee Nation had also previously expelled its freedmen, and the Seminole Nation currently grants only limited citizenship to its freedmen. Let me read that first sentence again so that you all understand it. I was sitting up here telling you, wait for it, wait for the name of that roll they were referring to before, hitting you like a freight train. Changes to the Choctaw Constitution in 1983 and the Muskogee Creek Constitution in 1979 required that a citizen of the nation must be descended from by blood citizens, disqualifying the freedmen who were counted separately in the federal census known as the Dawes Roll in 1906. Now why? Why was that so damn important? Why would that be so important? I want all of y'all to think about this for a few moments here. Why would that be so damn important to them? Why is rewriting the history so important to them? I want to lay some negative vibes on you all right now. Do you know the year of the first Indian casino that was set up in the United States? I'm going to give all of you all a couple of minutes here to sit up here and go look that up. I'm going to give you a moment to go Google that right quick for those of you who can't say it off the top of your head, because I've covered this before on the program. But by the way, do you know the year of the establishment of the first Native American Indian casino in the United States? You can Google it and see. You can Google it and see. What do you know? Well, I'll be damned. What do you know? 1979. So when you say, well, why did they wait all these decades to sit up here and say, okay, black folk being in the tribe was never a point of contention. It was never a point of debate. It was never a point of conflict until the first Indian casino was approved. And that the Indians get certain exemptions, like being in states that outlaw casinos. Well, you could be exempted. Well, what do you know, when the bag showed up, just as soon as they saw an opportunity to get the bag, next thing you know, the black folks start getting the boot. Something that was not a point of debate or dispute or contention, something that had never been a point of argument, something that nobody was being conflicted about. As soon as they saw an opportunity to capitalize, next thing you know, you niggas gotta go. Y'all gotta go. 700, by the way, that's not listed in this article. Let me just go ahead and remind you, that's not stated in the article. The article doesn't say this. I'm the one telling you this because I know the dates. But this article does not remind you that, by the way, the Creek changed their constitution in 1979, the same year that the first Indian casinos were established. Then they changed to a by blood requirement. Kicked all the black folk out so that they could set a precedent. But didn't go after the white folk like that. Interesting. You all didn't think you were going to learn anything. If you want to know the power of falsifying history, the power of going back and rewriting history, you were Native American citizens. You were members of the tribe. We're going to go back and rewrite the damn history, change the Constitution. Boom. Once you do that, you've now got control of the present and the future. That's the point I'm trying to make. You have control of the present and the future. It goes on to say here that equal citizenship in a Native American nation would qualify the freedmen for a number of tribal services, including housing, health care, education, much of it funded by the federal government. Y'all getting y'all's reparations. Y'all are getting y'all's reparations like a mug. Y'all are getting yours. Y'all got your reparations. The Japanese and the Asians got their reparations. Everybody got their reparations except us. Y'all got yours. Still getting it now. These would be the very folk telling us that we don't need reparations. We ain't supposed to get it. They're getting theirs. They're getting theirs and then some. At what point have you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and you good from here? It says older Choctaw and Creek freedmen recall being eligible for those services before they were expelled from the nations. Funding in the CARES Act distributed to tribal nations recently funded services exclusively available to by blood tribal citizens. Did you get that? Funding in the CARES Act. So for the folks, Roland Martin and the rest of the jigaboom jackasses who tried to sit up here and talk about the CARES Act, when they try to talk to you about the CARES Act, you all remind them that the CARES Act funds Native Americans and it doesn't help black people. It excludes black people. Next time they try to say something. Next time some bootlick tries to bring up the CARES Act, you just let them know. Y'all need to have your facts together. The CARES Act is using our tax dollars and federal money to disenfranchise black people and to specifically only target a specific race group of people. By specifically denying us. Funding in the CARES Act distributed to tribal nations recently funded services exclusively available to by blood tribal citizens. Seminole freedmen who applied were denied because of their limited citizenship in the Seminole Nation. The Choctaw and Creek freedmen would also be guaranteed civil and political rights within their nations, such as the ability to vote and run for tribal office. In interviews, descendants of freedmen describe repeated appeals to the tribes for inclusion as equal citizens and repeated denials on the basis of their race. Quote, "It's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking." The Reverend McKinley Rice, the senior pastor of St. Matthew Baptist Church in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and a Creek freedman said, "In the day that we live in and in the time that we live in, we was hoping and praying that racism and discrimination was, gone." The letter from Mr. Batten marked a shift in the Choctaw Nation. Mr. Batten, now listen to this. Listen to this. The letter from Mr. Batten marked a shift in the Choctaw Nation. Mr. Batten wrote to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This was back in 2021. Mr. Batten wrote to Speaker Nancy Pelosi nearly a year ago, condemning efforts of Representative Maxine Waters, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, to compel the tribe to re-enroll its freedmen as citizens by withholding federal funding. So in other words, Maxine Waters threatened to close up the bag. She said, hey, y'all getting money from the federal government. She says that they started squealing. Now, isn't that interesting when your black so-called representatives actually do some damn representing? It's amazing what can happen when they actually do some damn representing for once. Maxine Waters is currently running as the Latino representative from Compton. The letter from Mr. Batten marked a shift by the Choctaw Nation. Mr. Batten wrote to Speaker Nancy Pelosi nearly a year ago, condemning efforts by Representative Maxine Waters, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, to compel the tribe to re-enroll its freedmen as citizens by withholding federal funds. Quote, "The freedmen issue is a problem caused by the United States, not the Choctaw Nation," Mr. Batten said at the time, referring to, quote, "America's enslavement of African Americans," while making no mention that the Choctaw freedmen are the descendants of people enslaved by the Choctaw Nation. Y'all, you're dealing with some down and dirty people here. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You're dealing with some down and dirty people here. These are race warriors, man. These are race warriors here. He's not ignorant of his history. He knows it. He's not ignorant of his history. He knows the history. Now he's trying out some "I'm white or red Indian and I said so." He is neither stupid nor ignorant of the history. He didn't leave that out by accident. He left that out deliberately because he knows that is a damning statement. That is a damning statement. Oh yeah, one more little tidbit. That's Chief Gary Batten. By the way, one more little tidbit. There's Chief Gary Batten of the Choctaw Nation. That's him. So in case you wanted to know who he was or what he looked like or whatever, there's Chief Gary Batten of the Choctaw Nation. That's him. Telling you that you're not Indian enough. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Telling you that he recognizes white folk, the Europeans enslaving black folk, but it skipped his mind that the Choctaw, the whole debate is the fact that the freedmen are the descendants of the Choctaw slaves. They were not the descendants of American slaves, they're the descendants of the Choctaw slaves. Of your government, Mr. Batten. Folks, you have a reparations argument against the Choctaw Nation because their government is still here. Their government was not annihilated. The Choctaw Nation's government is still here. Matter of fact, this guy is the 47th chief of the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw Nation's government is still around. So you see, you have valid claims because the Choctaw Nation's government is still here. This isn't some historical government that went away. The Choctaw Nation's government is still right here. Still here. In an interview, Mr. Batten said the federal government played a role in facilitating racist policies like the by blood requirement for citizenship. He added that the Interior Department ultimately accepted the constitutional changes from the Native American nations that had expelled the freedmen in violation of Reconstruction treaties. So what he's sitting up here saying, yeah, we both liars and we're both thieves, but you need to talk to that thief and that liar over there. Don't come talk to my thieving lying behind. We both broke the law. We both broke the rules. We're both doing something evil, but don't talk to me. Go talk to them folk over there. That's what he's saying. That they understand that this was in violation of treaties. They understood this, but we doing it anyway. So everybody loves white supremacy until the bill comes due. Everyone loves being white supremacists until we hand them that bill. Once we hand them the bill, all of a sudden, ain't no white supremacists anymore. Once we hand them the bill. He goes on to say, quote, my issue with the federal government is because they've implemented policies and we followed those. And now they're saying that we should not abide by those policies. They implemented policies. What the hell are you talking about? You asked for it. He's sitting up here telling you that the Choctaw Nation asked to change their constitution and that because the federal government went along with it, now we're supposed to let them off the hook. You asked to make these changes. You are the culprit. You ain't gonna sit up here and make the federal government the bag man. Well, you need to go at them. No. We found who we need to go at. We found them. We found who we need to go for. Chuck Hoskin Jr., boy, these names, these sound real Native American to me. Chuck Hoskin Jr., the chief of the Cherokee Nation, who has been a longtime supporter of the Freedmen, said tribes had worked tirelessly to make sure the federal government upholds its treaty obligations. Cherry picking which treaties to uphold undercuts that fight, he said. Quote, I don't think any nation is as strong as it can be when it denies its history and suppresses part of its society, Mr. Hoskin said. I think that's what's happened in respect to the Freedmen. The Chickasaw Nation had jointly signed its Reconstruction Treaty with the Choctaw Nation, but did not comply with the condition to enroll its freedmen as citizens. Some Chickasaw freedmen enrolled as citizens of the Choctaw Nation, but were never included as citizens of the tribe that had enslaved them. Did you get that? Some Chickasaw freedmen enrolled as citizens of the Choctaw Nation, but were never included as citizens of the tribe that had actually enslaved them. Bill Anatobi, the governor of the Chickasaw Nation, said in a statement responding to Ms. Holland's remarks that, quote, Chickasaw citizenship is a matter of sovereignty and is clearly defined in the Chickasaw Constitution. So just understand what that statement means. That simply means that we get the ability to decide who is or who isn't. The Seminole Nation did not respond to requests for comment. Laetta Osborne Sampson, a Seminole freedman who serves on the tribe's governing council, said she did not expect the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma to follow suit voluntarily. Ms. Osborne Sampson said the tribe's position has long been that it would take a ruling by a higher court to compel them to allow freedmen to be recognized as equal citizens. So the Seminole Nation, the so-called Seminole Nation, and yes, I know about the Black Seminoles. We all know about that by now. Shout out Tariq. But by the way, if you want to know what was happening up there, the non-black ones, you let them write the damn rules. You let them take over your history. Next thing you know, you let them start falsifying your history. Next thing you know, this is what you become. When you let them run the history books, when you let them control who is historically classified as, it turns to this. Ms. Osborne Sampson said the tribe's position has long been that it would take a ruling by a higher court to compel them to allow freedmen to be recognized as equal citizens. Eli Grayson, a Creek citizen with freedman heritage, said he was skeptical of the statements from tribal leadership. He noted that the freedmen barred from citizenship would have no influence over a vote to change the tribe's constitutions and predicted the measures would ultimately fail. Quote, citizens today do not have a right to vote on an issue that was settled during the Civil War, Mr. Grayson said. They've already settled this treaty with the U.S. They don't have a right to change the conditions of that treaty. For the Muskogee Creek Nation, race was a key motivation for changing the Constitution. In a National Council meeting in 1977 discussing the changes, the principal chief at that time, Claude Cox, expressed fear that the nation would be outnumbered and replaced by its black citizens over time. Quote, the full-bloods lost control. That's what we're fighting, Mr. Cox said. When you get down to what's really motivating them, when people tell you that you can't be white supremacist if you're not white, then you start asking these folks their positions on black folk, and you see a common thread of similarity going through everyone. The chief of the Creek Nation at the time expressed fear that the nation would be outnumbered and replaced by its black citizens over time. Sounds exactly like the Anglos, doesn't it? Sounds exactly like the Anglos, doesn't it? That fear of genetic annihilation right here. And many people, they say that the swastika, its origin, you can find the swastika's origin among some Native Americans, by the way. If you go look for it, I'm not saying it was made by the Native Americans, but when you look up the history of the swastika, you always see that they always have a Native American annotation in there as well. I just found it an interesting thing to add. Just an interesting aside. Just an interesting aside, by the way. Yeah, you can go look up about the swastika and whatnot. And if you know your history of the swastika, by the way, you look at that symbol. Couldn't help but notice. Just an interesting aside. Mr. Hill, the current principal chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation, said in his proposal that citizenship for freedmen, quote, is a polarizing issue for our citizens. This deeply personal and highly emotional issue goes to the heart of identity for both Creek citizens and the descendants of freedmen, Mr. Hill said. As a nation committed to truth and justice, it is important that we reflect upon this issue with an open heart and seek to understand what is right and equitable. Now, what I want to do here, because they had a link, and by the way, y'all heard what they said there. Did that sound like the Biden administration's putting any pressure on any damn body? Did that sound like the Biden administration putting any pressure on anyone? Did that sound like the Biden administration is making anything happen to crack off? Did that sound like the Biden administration was doing anything? So the New York Times, lying as usual. But what I want to go here, because they had a link. They had a link to discuss about the Reconstruction treaties. They had a link discussing the Reconstruction treaties. And when you go there to the Oklahoma Historical Society, a link discussing the treaties in particular. I want to read these 3 paragraphs. The definitive treaties were finalized in D.C. The Chickasaw and Choctaw signed a joint treaty on July 10th, 1866. The Creek and Cherokee treaties were proclaimed on August 11th and the Seminole Treaty on August 16th. Generally, all the treaties contained amnesty for all crimes committed against the United States prior to the treaties and included specific provisions of peace and friendship toward the United States. So in other words, just like Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy, they basically wanted to stop posse comitatus. They wanted to make sure that basically going forward, it would be bygones or bygones, and that they, the Native Americans who sided with the Confederacy, would not be prosecuted for any of the crimes that they committed during the war or prior to the war, that they would be given blanket amnesty for all their crimes. So just understand that's the first thing about these treaties. The terms of these treaties were more favorable to the 5 tribes than the offerings at the Fort Smith Council. You can look that up if you want to. At the Washington meeting, Cooley, Sells, and Parker joined Secretary of the Interior James Harlan in representing the federal government. The Cherokees had 2 delegations, the Northern delegation directed by John Ross, who died shortly after the treaty was completed, and the Southern delegation led by former Confederate leaders Elias C. Boudinot and Stan Watty. The Creek and Seminole also had Northern and Southern delegations. The other 2 tribes only had 1 delegation each. By the way, for that Cherokee delegation, former Confederate leaders, when you start digging through the history, you sound kind of silly trying to cosplay. Dr. Claude Anderson's talked about that. Dr. Claude Anderson talked about that. Black folk trying to identify as Muslim and Arab. They warned, don't do that. The history on that is not very good. Don't do that. It's not just off code. It's a bad idea. Don't do that. Now listen to the next paragraph here. Concessions were made by all of the tribes. The first to abolish slavery and give the freedmen tribal rights. So they're talking about the concessions that they had to make. The first was to abolish slavery and give the freedmen tribal rights. The Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole treaties gave the freedmen unqualified rights, but the Choctaw and Chickasaw Treaty gave them the choice of being adopted into their nations or being removed by the federal government and settled elsewhere. Did you get that? Did you get that? Let me go ahead and read that again to make sure you understood what you heard. Concessions, all the tribes had to make concessions. Concessions were made by all of the tribes. The first concession was to abolish slavery and give the freedmen tribal rights. Did you hear that? Did you hear anything in here about by blood? That's my point. They were very conciliatory after that Civil War, after getting their butts whooped. By the way, there was a lot of black folk fighting on the side of the Union. But you notice there wasn't any arguing talking about by blood. You didn't hear anything about by blood. The first was to, all it demanded of them was the first was to abolish slavery and give the freedmen tribal rights. The Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole treaties gave the freedmen unqualified rights, but the Choctaw and Chickasaw Treaty gave them the choice of being adopted into their nations, or being removed by the federal government and settled elsewhere. The second compromise was to establish an intertribal council. Each tribe would have 1 representative with an additional representative for each 1,000 tribal members. The superintendent of Indian Affairs would serve as the council's chief executive. The third concession was the agreement that all the tribes would give up land in their various domains for rights of way for railroad construction through IT. And that's not information technologies. All right. That's the territory. Now, you see here what they're saying. Last one, the final compromise was that each tribe would give up a considerable amount of land as a penalty for having supported the Confederacy. So in other words, the federal government presented them with the bill. So in other words, what you are telling us is that the federal government did exactly what the hell we talking about. The federal government presented them with a bill and told them, okay, well, we can let bygones be bygones, but by the way, we want to let you know that there's going to be a price to pay for having done the wrong thing. There's a price to pay for being on the wrong side of history. The final compromise was that each tribe would give up a considerable amount of land as penalty for having supported the Confederacy. The Cherokee gave up their neutral lands in southeastern Kansas and the Cherokee Strip to be sold to the highest bidder for not less than $1.25 an acre. Back then, $1.25 went a hell of a lot farther than it does today. They also agreed to allow the federal government to settle other tribes in the Cherokee Outlet in exchange for payment made by the government to the Cherokee Nation. Through their Reconstruction Treaty, the Choctaw and Chickasaw ceded to the United States the leased district in the western half of their domain for $300,000. A clause in this treaty, July 1866, referred to all the area of the 5 tribes as the, quote, territory of Oklahoma. This was the first mention of the name Oklahoma in an official document of the United States and had been suggested by Allen Wright, member of the Choctaw delegation. The Creek ceded the western half of their lands for $975,168. Some of the land was to be used for rebuilding and the remainder was to be held in a trust. Well, that's interesting. I find that very interesting because you see, when you name that name Freedmen, we all recognize the term Freedmen from the Freedmen's Bank. But no one has ever acknowledged that we should have had a trust set up for us, nor have they ever acknowledged that we should have a retroactive trust set up to reimburse us for what we have had forcibly taken from us. So the Native Americans were given a trust, but the former slaves were not. Interesting what you find when you don't let folks falsify your history. The Creek ceded the western half of their lands for $975,168. Some of the land was to be used for rebuilding and the remainder was to be held in trust. The Seminoles ceded all of their land to the federal government for 15 cents an acre. They then had to purchase 200,000 acres for 50 cents an acre from the government. Ironically, the government had purchased it for 30 cents from the Creek. So it looks like the Creek Nation pretty much has always had a bit of a better business sense than a lot of these other folks. So the Creek Nation clearly had better negotiators. Clearly they did. But by the way, if you ever want to know what happened to the Seminole, you want to know what happened to the Seminole for all their treachery? You want to know what happened to them? How they got rewarded? Yeah, they sold it for 15 cents an acre and then had to come back and buy it for 200,000. No wonder you're salty. No wonder you're salty. For all your acts of treachery before the Civil War and during, by the way, that's what you got rewarded for it. The worst negotiators, the worst deal makers I ever saw. As a result of this final concession, the 5 tribes lost the western half of present Oklahoma. These treaties had a tremendous impact on future relations between the federal government and the 5 tribes. The influx of whites moving into the territory after the Civil War pressed for statehood during the 1890s and early 1900s. However, tribe members fought to retain their sovereignty based on the clause in the Reconstruction treaties that stated that no federal legislation could interfere with or annul their tribal organization. And then they turn right around and next thing you know, they sit up here and go amend their constitutions and amend theirs in violation of the treaties. The very treaties that they're calling on, they've had no problem going back amending their constitutions in direct violation of treaties. I want to do a deep dive on this tonight because I want you all to understand that so often when we're putting together the case for reparations, so often when we're indicting the U.S. government, so often when we're mentioning these things, we leave out huge, gigantic chunks of very pertinent, very relevant information. When you start looking over your history, when you start seeing how you've been disenfranchised, do you understand black folks should be a hell of a whole lot richer than we are today? And I'm going to say one more damn thing. If we were running those Indian casinos, they would be the biggest in the world. They'd be the biggest and most flyest in the world and wouldn't cost nearly as much. So we have been attacked on all fronts. The federal government and the state governments have always been present for the purposes of disenfranchising us actively. Actively. And these are arguments that go specifically to the descendants of the slaves. Specifically. I'm not just calling out black folk in general. We ain't talking about the immigrant class. I'm talking about the experience specifically of the descendants of the American slaves. Specifically the descendants of the slaves here. Specifically us. And I'm showing you all the twists and turns that have made this happen. You got black folk here now. What the hell could we have done if we owned half of Oklahoma? If we had free reign over half of Oklahoma and then had money coming in beside that, please, we wouldn't even need the damn federal government today. Black folk ain't never wanted the federal government in our business. You can add that to your Oxford African American English Dictionary. We've never wanted the federal government in our business. That's why they've been strangling and choking us, because these other folk are going to go to work for the white establishment. We ain't going to do it. We're not going to do it. They can't depend on us to do that. It's only, even if you got the most bootlickingest nigga imaginable, it's only going to be a matter of time before Dr. John Henry Clark comes up. It's only going to be a matter of time before a Jason Black comes up. It's only going to be a matter of time before a Malcolm X comes up. It's only going to be a matter of time. You can't have some widespread system that allows black people as a wide group to prosper. You can't have that. It'll only be a matter of time before a small core of troublemakers, if you will, get a foothold on the wealth and make some big things pop off, and then Katie bar the damn door, it's over. Judgment Day is here. Katie bar the door, it's over. So I'm showing you, this is why I wanted to take you through it and walk you through it step by step, line by line, so that you understand what you're looking at. From MSNBC and its misinformation, all the way to the New York Times, to put this in its proper context. That when we discuss reparations, I want to make sure you have a clear view of why we need that. We have been undermined and targeted as no one else has been since the very beginning. We have been targeted. You damn right, cut the check. You damn right, cut the damn check. Because you've been cutting the check for everyone else and they've been pissing it off. I've been through Native American, I've been through reservations. Oklahoma, Texas. You go, anybody who's driven west, if you've been through those reservations and those areas out there, all through the western United States, there's nothing going on. Nothing. It is empty. I don't really want to use the term wasteland. I don't really want to say that, but I will say it ain't beachfront property. And I've driven through them. Goes on for miles and miles and miles. And I'm talking about dozens of miles. And by that, I mean like 80, 90, 120. Ain't nobody building it up. No one's developing it. Nobody's getting nothing popping. Ain't nothing sitting up here popping off. Nothing's cracking off. They'll have a store over here or some souvenir shop over there. We've been trying to get a place where we won't get harassed at. If we had that and some funding and leave us the hell alone, let me tell y'all something. Do you know the real reason that you can't afford to have a Freedmen reservation? Do you know the reason why you cannot afford to have a Freedmen reservation? Because you ain't going to be able to infiltrate us with coons, and if we run the court system, they can get dealt with. Because the first law we're going to make is one for treason, because we know you going to send them, and we know they're coming. So if we actually had the wherewithal and the leniency and the liberty to deal with them the way we need to, every time you see black folk get together in a group, you always see that. Whenever we get together in a group, it eventually gets down to filtering out the real from the phony. We done always did that. Nat Turner, find out who's lying, find out who's fake. Harriet Tubman, find out who's lying, find out who's fake. Marcus Garvey in the Universal Negro Improvement Association, find out who's lying and find out who's fake. Carter G. Woodson, find out who's lying, find out who's fake. The Nation of Islam, find out who's real, find out who's phony. The Black Panthers, find out who's real, find out who's phony. The Bloods and the Crips, who, as you all know, are the bastards of the Black Panther Party. They're the outgrowth of the party. Find out who's real, find out who's fake. And that code persists to this day. And even right here among us, we always saying who goes there. We always checking the paperwork. We're always reviewing the pedigree. Who goes there? Who's real and who's fake? That's going to be the first order of business, because we understand the fake folk are a cancer and a disease. They sent here by somebody else. They serving someone else. You got to get rid of them and deal with them early. See, if we're allowed to make the rules and deal with that, first thing we're going to do is do a house cleaning. We're going to make sure everyone is straight. That's how you keep folk from messing up what you got. Hell no, you can't let black folks set up a Freedmen reservation where they got the land, they got the rules, they got the courts, they can hand out the punishments, and nobody can stop them. No, you got to have the federal government able to step in and say, oh, wait now. Hold on a second now. No, you can't mess with Alex Haley now. You can't do that. You got to let him go now. You got to let him go. You can't crack down on him. Skip Gates now. Y'all can't get too wild about that now. Skip Gates. And you can't do that now. You got to give Skip Gates a seat at the table now. You got to do that. You can't just sit up here and tell Skip Gates he can't sit here and cause trouble. Now, you got to give him a seat at the table. Come on now. When the federal government is involved, the federal government is always going to make sure that they install built-in traitors. They're always going to do that. Every single time, that's what they're going to do, is install turncoats. You set up a structure, and they're going to require, like a board of directors, where you got to have 2 or 3 turncoats on the damn chairman, on the panel, on the board. You got to have that. We have a suggestion for who you should add to it. We should have a suggestion. We have one. And whenever you let them make a suggestion, it's always going to be somebody who, that's the person who undermined and undercut everything you're doing. As soon as you let them make a recommendation, the first thing they do is bring in somebody. That's what y'all always look. With the Black Panthers, the so-called Asian Panther, your damn feminists coming in. Every time they bring in somebody, that's the person who undermines what the hell you was doing. You're good and you're okay as long as you still fool with the soil. When you deal with the soil and the grassroots, you're going to be good. It's only when you start trying to allow them to, okay, we got some suggestions who to bring in. Well, who you suggesting? Oh, he's a fella here. He's just like y'all. What's his name? Barack Obama. I mean, he's from Chicago. He ain't been in Chicago but 5 years. What the hell are you talking about? You can't be, you don't want to be exclusionary now. Yeah, we need to be exclusionary. You're damn right we do. We sure do. Well, we have another suggestion for you. Oh, hell. Who's that? His name's Cory Booker. Man, are you jiving me? Add that to your African American dictionary. By the way, I'm just saying, if you're going to add a real word, jiving needs to be one, by the way, if you're going to add one. Don't worry, we got another suggestion for you. Man, if y'all don't quit. No, this was a good one. I don't believe you. You need more people. No, seriously, hear me out. Okay, this is your last one. Okay, her name's Kamala. Waiter, check, please. Every time they show up, whoever they suggest, that's going to be the bad seed. That's going to be the bad apple. All they do is bring in infiltrators. If we control the rules and we are the gatekeepers, ain't no infiltrators getting in. Y'all got to understand something. You have been sold a bill of goods and a lie. Jason, what's the lie we've been sold? You've been sold the idea that if black folk get together in a group, it ain't gonna be nothing but coonery and buffoonery, and there won't be a hierarchy of excellence. That's a damn lie. Every place you look, both in North America and outside of North America for that matter, but specifically in North America, because it's the worst case scenario, you don't have a place where black folk are left alone and things go bad. You don't have that. You don't have a place where black folk are left alone and it goes bad. The places where you think it's, quote, gone bad, those are the places you're being tampered with. Chicago is folks like to talk about Chicago, even though that is highly overblown. But if you want to get down to the nitty gritty, folks in Chicago know Chicago is the most racially segregated city in America. That's the definition of tampering. The city has orchestrated the building of Lincoln Yards on the north side. There's no reason you can't orchestrate that on the south side, except you trying to get that land cheap because you want that to be the cleared out areas for these big expansive projects you want to do. So you need that to remain spread out and desolate. But everywhere you go, folks, everywhere you go, if we're left alone, things gonna pop off. Rap music didn't become what it is today because of white leadership. Nigga, what's wrong with you? Our soul food culture that everybody's trying to emulate today, it didn't become what it is today because of white leadership. It became what it is today in spite of white tampering, not because of it. Y'all been sold a bill of damn goods that we can't get nothing popping and get nothing flying, get nothing great unless some white folk are there to lead us by the hand. We got plenty of examples. We built American culture, not because of white leadership, in spite of it. And I'm talking about things today. New Orleans got flooded out. Next thing you know, y'all got great food all over the damn South. I'm like, oh, I'll be damn, it tastes like Louisiana here. Yeah, you find out the restaurant's owned by people from Louisiana. What happened to you, Katrina? Okay. Black folk redesigned the world's dress code, not because of white leadership, but in spite of it. We rewrote the cultural rules, not because of it, but in spite of it. Black folk were running around with big, thick gold chains in the 70s and the 80s. Wasn't no white corporations paying for a damn thing. Run DMC and LL Cool J, it wasn't no white corporations making that pop off. You had to get that from the soil. Curtis Blow and the rest of them, you had to get that from the soil. We had to make that happen. Wasn't nobody sitting up here, well, you know, our corporations made this occur. The damn hell you did. You wasn't nowhere to be seen. Y'all didn't show up until the 90s, and that's when you started messing things up. Here you come with the baboon rap. The white folks showed up, and next thing you know, rap goes from being the music of the revolutionary to being the music of the baboon. And the druggie. Next, don't you see a pattern? They show up and things go downhill. They show up and things deteriorate. You ain't got a slum until the white supremacists show up. Now you got a slum. You go take the so-called most ghettoest individual you ever met, you put him on the Auburn or the Alabama football team, and every Becky at the school will be telling you, ain't nothing ghetto about him. Shout out RG3. If it was so damn bad, if we can't get nothing cracking on our own, if we don't have the discipline for it, explain to me how it is the hell you get at these schools. They lined up Every single one of them fellas got 3 or 4 blondes on his sexual rap sheet. How is that? If we ain't doing it on our own, how the hell's that happening? If we're persona non grata and we're the bad side of town, explain to me why the hell all them blonde chicks are lined up at the combine. Explain that to me, because I don't understand it. I don't get it. If we can't get it popping on our own, and we're the bad side of town, and all we know is slummery, explain to me why the hell all them blondes are lined up, all them redheads lined up. Explain to me how the hell that keeps happening with no orchestration by the white folk. Just them being who they are. Rick Ross just held a damn concert on his land, his own land in Georgia. They trying to hit him with fines and every damn thing else, by the way. He just held a concert on his own damn land in Georgia. Travis Scott, I know. But Travis Scott, they're in Houston, got his own concert now that he holds every year. Of course, hopefully, barring some legal issues here. But we dealt with that before. See, they'll sit up here, take a look, Kanye West spent years yelling about they don't want to let me in the clothing industry. Next thing you know, I mean, the stuff is ugly as hell, but it's a multi-billion-dollar venture. Hey, brother, if you can make $3 or $4 billion with that ugly ass stuff you selling, go for it. Go for it. They have y'all believing that if black folk actually get control and get proper capital, everybody just gonna go out and go buy some rims and that's gonna be the end of that. Let me tell y'all something. Hustle culture is something that hadn't been cultivated. Y'all need to understand, when money get free flowing around, hustling is contagious. Do y'all understand that? Hustling is contagious. When dudes actually got the ability to make things happen and they ain't out here begging and struggling, hustling is contagious, man. It's contagious. It's not hard. We're a people born with hustling in our bones. Hustling is contagious. You all have been bred to believe that it's not. Hustling is contagious. I'm gonna say it, damn it. I'm gonna say it. You ain't gonna like it, but I'm gonna say it. Whether it's hustling drugs or hustling them draws. Whether it's hustling music, and the drug trade taught us how to do that when the record stores wouldn't let us in. I said it, damn it. I said it. One of your first black legit millionaires, hey, she did what she did. Make it do what it do. Make it do what it do. You in the system of white supremacy. Make it do what it do. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just observing it. I'm not endorsing it, but I'm damn sure observing it. Hustling's in the bones. Hustling's in the bones. Folks, take a look at Malcolm X's history. Once the money started moving, people, we can keep going with this if you want me to. Nikki Barnes. Hustling's in the bones. Nikki come up, a whole bunch of other folks started coming up. That's the way it's always been. BMF. One come up, it's always coming up. Freeway Rick. We can go down the list. Frank Lucas, we can go down the list. Bumpy Johnson, we can go down the list. You get Frank Lucas from Bumpy Johnson. You get Nikki Barnes out of that ecosystem with Frank Lucas and Bumpy Johnson. It rolls like a freight train. It steamrolled downhill. Every hustler that you can name, every single one either worked under another hustler or was on the periphery of them big time hustlers. Hustling is contagious. It's contagious. Hustling is contagious. That's what y'all ain't getting. You got folks up here deceiving you. Y'all just a bunch of gangsters and thugs. People. NWA was a bunch of young black men. You can call them gangsters, thugs, whatever you want to. Dr. Dre is a mega multimillionaire today. Ice Cube right there with him. Out of the 5 of them, do you understand that? That's insane. By the way, out of the 5 of them, 3 of the 5, For the sake of argument, we're not going to count Arabian Prince, even though there is a story there. Yes, I'm aware of it. Yes, I know it. But for the sake of argument, I'm not disrespecting Arabian Prince. Let me be very, very clear. I respect what Arabian Prince did. He jumped ship first because he saw things wasn't right. But for the sake of argument, historically, let's just count the 5 from NWA. Do you all realize that 60% of NWA set up multi-million-dollar institutions? Out of those 5 black men, we're going to count DJ Yell as black. Don't hate. Do you understand that ratio? Do you get that? Out of those 5 black men, you had a 60% millionaire establishment ratio. Out of those 5, 3 of the 5, Eazy-E, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre. That is unheard of. That's unheard of. And everywhere you go now, you see the same thing, because Ice Cube made it the language and the music that, hey, it's about owning what you're doing and not letting folks mess you over. Next thing you know, you have the offspring of Ruthless Records, Death Row Records. Everything they touch turned to platinum. That has never happened in the music industry before or since. Everything Death Row touched turned to platinum. The music industry never saw anything before it and has like that, and has never seen anything since like that. And by the way, what happened to them? Daz's money is straight, he'll tell you. Corrupt is straight, he'll tell you. Snoop Dogg is definitely straight. He bought Death Row after all these decades. If Tupac was still alive, his money would still be straight. He's straight posthumously. Nate Dogg, rest in peace. If he had kept living, he'd have been straight. Warren G, he's straight. We can go down the list. That wasn't just Ruthless Records. Then you go to Death Row. Then you go forward to Cash Money. The ones you can keep out of trouble stay straight. When you name the Hot Boys, Juvenile, Manny Fresh, Lil Wayne, Birdman. Manny Fresh was already doing music in New Orleans. Birdman, the money is straight. Lil Wayne, the money is straight. Juvenile, asterisk. No disrespect. Folks, we can keep going if you want to. Atlanta, Outkast, Ludacris, Disturbing the Peace, T.I. We can go down the list. Hustling is contagious. I'm not talking about some folks who were one-hit wonders and that was it. I'm talking about folk who came into it and as soon as you gave them an inch, they took it a damn mile. Shout out Master P. Shout out Master P. You gave them an inch, they took it 50,000 miles. That's what they're scared of. These are the same brothers in the streets. And by the way, some of them was out there jacking and doing the worst. I'm not endorsing it. What I'm just saying to you is, by the way, these are some of those folks that you would have said, all they're going to do is go buy some rims. He's like, I might as well buy some rims. I can't start a real business. Might as well buy some rims. You all grossly underestimated, especially for the Gen X and Gen Z. Let me tell y'all something. These young kids out here today, man, they ain't with the bull jive. That's why they're on YouTube. That's why they're on Instagram. That's why they're on OnlyFans. I said it. I said it. Yeah, Jay Prince, Rap-A-Lot, Rockefeller. We be here all damn day. I'm talking about the young kids today, man. I'm talking about the young folk, those under the age of 30. Yeah, you got some out there in some bull jive, but you got a bunch of others out here. They trying to figure out how to crack the code and get it to pop off. That's what they're on. You go find the most thugged up dude. Okay, I'm going to say it. Hey, all them so-called gang members in Chicago and Detroit and whatnot, they gang members in Cleveland, but they also making music. So they gang members in Cleveland, they're gang members in Chicago, they gang members in Detroit. I mean, they busting caps and tearing it up, but they got enough sense They got a sideline making real music. Up to date, I'm talking about the bass is hitting like it's supposed to be and everything else. It's not my form of music. It's not my cup of tea, but think about that for a few moments. Some of the folk that you talking about, oh, they were just go blow it on drugs. They thugs and this, that, and the other. I'm telling you about the thugs who's sitting up here making music. Y'all can name the damn names. Houston, Dallas, Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, St. Louis, Atlanta. Shout out Young Thug. Shout out Gunna. Say less, Gunna. Say less. Say less. I can show you some of these folks that you talking about. They straight up thugs, straight up G's, straight up everything you want to name. And by the way, I couldn't help but notice practically all of them got some pedigree in this. Practically all of them. The very folk that you would say they ain't gonna do nothing with it except go blow it off. You'd be saying that, and I'm telling you, you'd be wrong in far more cases than you think. You would be wrong in far more cases than you think you would. I'm telling you, right now, show of hands in the chat room. If you got a reparations check for $500,000, or if your reparations gave you access to $500,000 in capital, how many of you say that you could get something cracked off? Give me the thumbs up emoji. And for those of you who say 500,000 is not enough, give me the thumbs down emoji. For those of you listening to me right now, if $500,000 is, if you had that and you was like, Jason, I guarantee I could turn that 500,000 into 2 million. If you know that, give me the thumbs up emoji. If you say, Jason, if I had access to $500,000 with no tampering and no harassment by the government, brother, we're going from $500,000 to 2.5. Watch. Those of you who say, Jason, I couldn't make it happen. It ain't gonna happen, bro. That ain't gonna be enough. I would need a few million. I can't make nothing happen with that. Jason, what you expect me to do with 500,000? I can't do nothing with that. Give me the thumbs down emoji. All I see is a bunch of thumbs up. That's all I see. All I see is a bunch of thumbs up right now because y'all know it's the damn truth. And take a look at you now by the dozens and dozens and dozens. Take a look at how that's lighting up right now because you all know that your condition is not natural selection. Your condition is engineered. You have been underestimated. You've been told by people that you can't do it. There's a whole bunch of folks. Those of you, anybody who would sit up here and say that, oh, if they get reparations, they ain't gonna do nothing but blow it on some rims. Understand, there's somebody saying it about you. There is somebody sitting around right now saying those exact same words about you. That you wouldn't do anything with it either, that you couldn't make anything happen with it. There's a whole bunch of folks who are saying that if you got it, you would just go off and go smoke weed. So for anybody here wanting to talk down to somebody else about that, just understand, you talking about somebody else just gonna go blowing on rims and weed. There's somebody who's saying the same thing about you right now. With you knowing it's not true. But there's somebody who's gonna say the exact same thing about you right now. We got far more people who can make this crack off. What they see in this chat room right now is the scariest, deadliest thing in the world. A bunch of black folk who that if y'all ever had a chance to come up, it ain't never going back down again. Let me explain something to y'all. Say something to you right now. That's not something I heard, it's something I've lived. It's not something I've heard, it's something I've lived. I seen it. And all of y'all got the same mentality. If they ever mess around and let you come up, if these folks ever mess around and let you come up, it's cracking off. If they ever fool around and let you get in a proper position, you know it's cracking off. And I know it's true because don't tell me about Jay-Z. Jay-Z wasn't Jay-Z until Jay-Z found a way. Tyler Perry wasn't Tyler Perry until Tyler Perry found a way. Birdman wasn't Birdman until Birdman found a way. Folks sleeping in their cars, sleeping in alleys, having to live with their friends because they didn't have nowhere to go, so they were functionally homeless. The folk that you talking about right now, they wasn't born who they were. They had to make it there. But if they didn't, folks would be saying the same thing about them. Look at Jay-Z, nothing but a thug. We need to lock him up. That's the guy. We need to give him 3 strikes. The prison industrial complex was made for folk like him. The prison industrial complex was made for folk like him. That's what they would be saying. That's what they'd be saying. They would be saying that. That's what they would be saying. If you want to know why distorting our history, falsifying our history is so important, you got a master class in it tonight, why it is so essential and so important that happen. Don't be deceived about why they do it. This isn't some mouth, down in the mouth discussion here tonight. No woe is me discussion tonight. I'm letting y'all all know we've been making progress. We've been making progress. The reason why you have more black millionaires than you have today is because more black people are on code, because more black people understand the odds that we're up against and understand what we're really fighting against. Not because of the white system, but in spite of it. That's where we're at. Not because of it, but in spite of it. So when we discuss reparations, I'm putting that in its proper context. You've been lied to about your history. Now that you understand more about it, you understand it in the context of Native Americans. Now you understand this. Oh, hell, we've been letting them off easy for a while. The free ride is over. The free ride is over. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up for you all here tonight. If you are new here to the Black Channel, welcome to the Haven of Intelligent Black Thought. We do this every weekend. Click that red subscribe button. Click that yellow notification bell. Join us each and every time that we're here. If you haven't been to our website, blackchannelfilms.com, you want to go and check out our groundbreaking best-selling documentary work, 7 a.m., Gentrified, Race War, all available on DVD and streaming. Go to blackchannelfilms.com. That is blackchannelfilms.com. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to support tonight's program on PayPal, CashApp, Super Chat, Venmo. Miss Lott, thank you very much for your help, for your support, ma'am, and I appreciate that. Mr. Roden and Mr. Kamathi, thank you much as well. In the Super Chat, YGLT, this is why the new black media is necessary. Absolutely true. Thank you very much for your support. And to all of you who tuned in here live or recorded, thank you very much as well. And this concludes tonight's broadcast of the Black Channel. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the Black Authority. And until next time, my brothers and my sisters from around the world, remember, black is the future, and the future is uncompromising.